We will call this meeting to order. For the record, it is Tuesday, March 24th, 2020 at 6:01 p.m. We'll begin this meeting with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Cavanagh.
Here.
Councilwoman Perot. Councilwoman Strader.
Here.
Councilman Hoagland.
Here.
Councilman Burnt.
Here.
Mayor Simison.
Here. Item number 2 is Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 3 is the community invocation. Do we see Mr. Jordan in the lobby? Okay. Then we will go ahead and move on to item 4, adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
we do have a couple additions possibly for tonight. On the consent agenda, we want to amend 5H, which is resolution number 20-2194, resolution approving the retirement of Meridian Police Department Police K-9 Randy, and we want to include the K-9 Dory as well.
Mr. Mayor? This is Jessica. Was roll already called?
It was, and we will mark you as being on the call.
Thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, if I might ask Councilwoman Perot, we are at the adoption of the agenda, and we just amended the consent agenda on 5H to include K-9 Dory in that. Do we have any other additions for our agenda this evening, Councilman Perot?
None from me.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
Councilmember Hogan, I guess I'd like to amend our action item agenda to create, I guess, a 7A1, an opportunity for the council to discuss meeting structure and format in light of these recent changes before we take the 3 action items.
So, Mr. Mayor,
I'm going to ask Mr. Neri, where's the right place for this item to be considered?
So, Mr. Mayor, to add, members of the council, Councilman Cavanagh, so to add an item once the meeting has started, Idaho Code 742044C says an agenda may be amended after the start of a meeting upon a motion that states the reason for the amendment and states the good faith reason the agenda item was not included in the original agenda posting. If you're going to take action, then also that has, on that agenda item, added after the start of the meeting, an emergency has to be declared necessitating action at that meeting. Emergency is defined in a different section of the code, 742042, that says an emergency is a situation involving injury or damage to persons or property or immediate financial loss or the likelihood of such injury, damage, loss when the notice requirements of this section would make such notice impractical or increase the likelihood or severity of such injury, damage, loss, and the reason the emergency is stated at the outset of the meeting. So the council has to find that the emergency is something that could cause immediate loss of property, persons, or financial loss. If you find that, you can have it as both a discussion item and an action item. To do it in front of the hearings, I just want to be cautious that the hearings still have a right to be heard, and they have a right to have their case reviewed by you, heard by you, and a decision by this body if you're able to reach a decision. So, as long as we keep that part in mind.
Mr. Mayor, if I might inquire of Councilman Cavanagh,
Councilman Hoagland.
would this be, I know we're dealing with something unprecedented here, and it creates a unique situation that I hope we don't never have to deal with again, but is this would it be a discussion for future meetings? I'm listening to our legal counsel here. We will have to do something on the action items tonight, and then we have a discussion for future meetings about how we go about that business.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
Councilmember Hoagland, I think it's a fair question. For me, whether we are discussing it before these three action items or after is somewhat irrelevant because, to Mr. Neri's point, anything that's noticed thus far, we're going to have before us. But I guess I also feel that would be beneficial to the applicants to also be able to hear from the council. Should they have to leave after their item, that they have the opportunity to hear about this before their items are heard. And again, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Hoagland, if the rest of council is supportive of us putting this at the end or not hearing this at all, I'm also okay with that. To your point, this is these uncharted waters. And when I had learned that most of us were going to be taking the meeting from home, that to me is like, oh, we are kind of change how we're doing things. And I thought that to me is what necessitated at least having that conversation, one on the record with the public about the changes that we're going to maybe make structurally and how that can also potentially impact the public hearing process.
Mr. Mayor, Liz.
Before we go too much further, we kind of have a motion to amend the agenda. I've not officially heard a second, and I've not officially heard the first agree to it. I want to at least get us into the proper format for considering this item. Does the first agree for purpose of discussion in terms of a second?
Mr. Mayor, yes, I would agree for purpose of the discussion that to figure out where we need to include another item for discussion.
Okay, so I have a motion and a second regarding where we are right now with on this topic. So with that, I think that was Councilwoman Strader.
Yes.
I was just going to second the motion.
Okay. So we do have the second. Is there any further discussion on the motion, which right now is amending the consent agenda and then adding an item 7A? I mean, sexually it's a 7A, which makes all the public hearings be B, C, and D is how I would interpret the motion. Would people like to have this a conversation before or after the public hearings?
And Mr. Mayor, just to, this is for
Councilman
adoption of the agenda, not just the consent agenda right now.
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
it's the full thing.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burnt.
I was under the impression that we were going to add this as item 7D, so we would hear this after the three applicants were finished with their presentations this evening.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
I would be fine with that. Just checking in with legal counsel, is that acceptable to do a 7D as opposed to an 8A?
Yes, I think a 70 is fine. Again, if it's not intended to be an action item and just a discussion item, then it can be 8 as well. So it really is I don't know what direction you're looking for. If you're going to want to vote on it, then it needs to be in the action item section. If you're not, it could be in the other.
So with that, I'm going to turn to the motion maker who was amended with the second to get direction from the two of you on where you would like to have the conversation and modify the motion or move it forward.
Oh, Mr. Mayor, I think in the possibility that there might be an action taken from our discussion, I don't know that, but to preserve that option, I think it makes sense to place that item as 7D on our agenda. And so I would do a substitute to my amendment. Anyway, we won't get into that, but my motion would be to move adoption of the agenda with amendments to 5H to include K9 Dory and to add item 7D for discussion of handling future council meetings and topics that come before us in light of the revised way that we're doing business.
Does the other council member who proposed this item agree with the 7D conversation?
Yeah, I'll agree. I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to add an item 7D in addition to the consent agenda modifications. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Motion is agreed to. So next item is item 5.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
as noted, we've amended the consent agenda to include under 5H, resolution number 20-2194, to include Canine Dory in that recognition and resolution of property. I would move that we approve the consent agenda and the mayor to sign and clerk to attest.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as amended. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the consent agenda is agreed to. Mr. Clerk, were there any signups under future meeting topics?
Mr. Mayor, they were not.
Okay, thank you. Then we will move into item 7A, which is a public hearing continued from March 10th, 2012 for Sky Mesa Highlands, H 2019-0123, and I'll turn this over for staff for comments.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Burnt.
Okay, here it goes. It just popped up. I wasn't able to see the presentation, but it just popped up. We're good. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. Continue, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, the first applications before you tonight are a request for annexation and zoning and a preliminary plat. This site consists of 30.6 acres of land. It's zoned RUT in Ada County and is located at the northwest corner of South Eagle Road and East Lake Hazel Road. The comprehensive plan future land use map designation is low-density residential, which calls for 3 or fewer units per acre. The applicant is requesting annexation of 31.96 acres of land with an R4 zoning district for the development of 74 new single-family residential detached homes at a gross density of 2.45 units per acre, consistent with the low-density residential future land use map designation. There is an existing home and accessory structures on this site that are proposed to remain on a lot in the proposed subdivision. And that is this large lot right here, if you can see my pointer. A preliminary plat is proposed as shown that consists of 75 buildable lots, 11 common lots, and 2 other lots on 30.6 acres of land. Originally, the plat was planned to develop in 1 phase, but is now proposed to develop in 2 phases as shown on the phasing plan on the right. The average lot size in the development is 11,000 square feet with a minimum lot size of 8,000 square feet. Access is proposed via the extension of stub streets to the north in Sky Mesa subdivision via East Deconic Drive, and emergency access only is proposed via Eagle Road, and that is in the location there depicted on the plat. The applicant is seeking a waiver from City Council to UDC 11-3A-3A3 for the access driveway via Eagle Road for the existing home to remain until such time as the property redevelops. At such time, access would be taken internally from within the subdivision via a common driveway, and the access would be closed. A 25-foot wide landscape street buffer and detached sidewalk is required along Eagle and Lake Hazel roads. Staff is recommending the buffer and sidewalk is extended across the frontage of the lot adjacent to Eagle Road in a common lot where the existing home is proposed to remain, except for the area where the driveway is located, if council approves a waiver for the access to remain. And again, that is this lot right here. A minimum of 10% qualified open space and 1 site amenity is required to be provided within this development. A total of 6.55 acres, or 21% of qualified open space, consisting of half the street buffer along Eagle and Lake Hazel roads, 8-foot wide parkways along internal streets, and common areas over 50 feet by 100 feet in area are proposed in excess of UDC standards. A large part of the common area includes 2 areas with significant slopes that are proposed to be landscaped in accord with UDC standards to count toward the qualified open space standards. This development is proposed to be included in the Sky Mesa Homeowners Association and will be granted access to all amenities in that development, consisting of 2 swimming pools and clubhouses, sports fields, which consist of a ball field, basketball court, walking paths, playground structure, and a swing set. The distance to these amenities range from 950 to 2,400 feet away from the northwest corner of this development. Because this will essentially be under another phase of Sky Mesa, and amenities were provided above the minimum standards for that development, staff is amenable to the applicant's request. The Grimet lateral runs along the west and north boundaries of this site, as shown, within a 30-foot wide irrigation easement that is proposed to remain open on the west side and be piped on the north side and be located within common lots. Fencing is proposed along the east side of the easement line, abutting building lots for safety. Just a side note, the original plat did show the Grimet lateral in an easement rather than a common lot. The applicants submitted revised plat and landscape plan that show this in a common lot now. The UDC requires all laterals to be piped unless used as a water amenity or linear open space as defined by the UDC. The applicant is requesting council approval of a waiver to this requirement to leave the lateral open along the west boundary of the site. Conceptual building elevations were submitted that demonstrate the architecture and building materials for single and two-story structures proposed within the development that include a mix of materials and colors with stone veneer wainscot. Because all the proposed units are detached, they are not subject to design review. The commission recommended approval of this project, and I'll go through a summary of the commission hearing. Todd Tucker, the applicant's representative, testified in favor of the application, along with Travis Hunter. No one testified in opposition. Sherry Ewing commented. Written testimony was received from Rick Thurber and Todd Tucker. Key issues of public testimony. Mr. Thurber requests the proposed irrigation system, which will replace the current one, has at least 60 psi to operate a sprinkler system instead of the 52 psi proposed, and that homes constructed on lots directly north of his boundary be restricted to a single story in height so as not to obstruct his views, and similarly trees that are planted be of a variety that they won't grow tall to obstruct his views. Ms. Ewing requested information on who will maintain their irrigation system, what type of landscaping will be installed along the south boundary of the development adjacent to her home, and how many feet from her back fence line to the road that is proposed below the hill from them. The applicant responded to these issues as follows. The purchase and sale agreements of homes adjacent to the street at the southern boundary of the development will have a scenic easement restricting the height of roofs of homes that are proposed there to at least 5 feet below the ground elevation of Mr. Cantrell's property, which is roughly the same height as the other lots adjacent to him to the east and west, to protect views. And this is a line of sight exhibit that the applicant submitted demonstrating that. Landscaping in the common area along the southern boundary of the site will consist of a dry land seed mix and will contain trees in accord with UDC standards, 1 per 8,000 square feet, that will be planted at the base and bottom of the slope so as not to interfere with views. The developer agrees to provide an irrigation system with at least 60 psi as requested. The distance from the back of the homes along Lake Hazel to the street, i.e. the slope along the southern boundary of this development, is approximately 60 feet, which with right-of-way, 50 feet, is approximately 110 feet to the homes. The following are the key issues of discussion by the commission. Implications on adjacent buildable lots if the Grimet lateral is allowed to remain open or be piped in an easement on buildable lots versus being placed in a common lot and improved as a water amenity. And then, as I mentioned, that is no longer applicable. The applicant is proposing common lots where the lateral is located. A future redevelopment and access of the lot where the existing home is proposed to remain. Continuance of the pathway in the central common area to the street on the west end. The applicant requests to remove the pathway from the central common area. The commission liked the pathway. I'm not sure that the applicant is, they're good with that now. They aren't requesting removal of that any longer. The type of fencing adjacent to the central common area pathway on lot 14, block 3. And finally, the retention of the existing access via Eagle Road for the existing home proposed to remain. The commission did make some changes to the staff recommendation. There are some changes and there's some comments, but I'll run through those real quick. In response to the applicant's request to remove the pathway, non-issue, we'll just go right past that. The commission directed the applicant to work with staff on the type of fencing to be constructed adjacent to the common area on Lot 14, Block 3, and that is this common area right here that we're talking about. And the applicant is proposing 4-foot solid fencing with 2-foot open vision at the top in accord with UDC standards. The commission directed the applicant to work with ACHD and the fire department to resolve concerns with traffic and secondary accesses and phasing. A revised phasing plan was submitted, which depicts a secondary emergency access that has been approved by the fire department, and that did not affect any changes to the conditions. The commission recommends council not require the Grummet lateral to be piped as requested by the applicant, and that the applicant work with staff in the irrigation district on landscaping possibilities or potential water features there. The applicant contacted the irrigation district, and the only landscaping that they'll allow within the easement is grass. They requested that a DA provision be included requiring a scenic easement for homes on lots 15 through 27, Block 3, to be 5 feet below the ground elevation of Mr. Cantrell's and neighboring homes adjacent to the southern boundary of the site on Lake Hazel Road. They included a new condition for trees planted within the common lot on Lot 10, Block 1, to be planted at the base of the slope. And they included a development agreement provision requiring an irrigation system with at least 60 PSI for the property owners to the south along at Lake Hazel Road. There's only one outstanding issue for council tonight, the applicant's request for a waiver to UDC 113A6B3, which requires the waterway along the west boundary of the site to be piped unless used as a water amenity or linear open space, as defined by the UDC, to leave the waterway open. Council may grant a waiver if it finds the public purpose requiring such will not be served and public safety can be preserved. And the commission did recommend council approve the applicant's request for a waiver. And then actually there is one more item for council, and that is the request for a waiver for access for the existing home to retain their access from Eagle Road. There has been some written testimony since the commission hearing from the Southern Rim Coalition. They had the following comments. A large portion of the qualified open space is unusable slope area. They request these areas not be counted towards the minimum open space standard and that green space adequate for recreational activities is provided. They are concerned pertaining to the native grasses on the slope between homes on Lot 14 and who would be responsible for trimming and weed prevention. Concern pertaining to fire hazard if not properly maintained and less than desirable fire department response times to the site. And finally, the need for protection of the view sheds and property values of the homes on large estate lot properties at the southern end of the development area. Staff will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Sonia. Are there any questions for staff at this time?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
question for Sonia. I just want to make sure I understand the minimum 10% qualified open space issue. And with that large sloped area, it says they're proposed to be landscaped in accordance with UDC standards to count toward the qualified open space standards. So if it's a slope, it sounds like it's fairly steep. As long as it's grassed or something done with it, it does qualify? Or can you
Yes, as long
clarify?
as, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Hoagland, as long as it meets the minimum dimensional standards, which is 50 by 100 at least in area, and it's planted in accord with UDC standards, grass and 1 tree per 8,000 square feet, it does count. There are no, code doesn't speak to slopes in that section of code.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any other
Mayor,
questions
Liz.
for staff at this time? If not, the applicant will please come
Mayor,
forward.
Liz.
Councilwoman Schrader.
Thanks. Sorry, I couldn't tell if you could hear me. I apologize. Sonia, could you walk us through the logic of the previous phase of this development and what open space and amenities they provided that gave staff comfort in approving this one with, obviously not ideal qualified open space. And it sounded like they had gone over the minimum in that property, so that's adjacent. If you could just go through that real quick.
I believe what she was asking was tying in the amenities to the other parts of Sky Mesa that are being applied towards this project and what those are. Am I hearing you correctly, Council Administrator? It's just
Yes.
need to make, okay.
Yes, thank you. That was much better than I put it.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Strader, were you asking which amenities are already provided in Sky Mesa to the north that will be shared by this development? So, as I stated in my presentation, if you can see the slide before you, there's a swimming pool, a clubhouse, ball field, playground, swimming pool, clubhouse, basketball court, ball field, swing set.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Schrader.
And so how much did they exceed the requirement by on the first phase? If you could just break down, is there 5 amenities required and they provided 10? I mean, just how much did they exceed it by? Did between the two properties, do they equal our requirement or exceed it?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Strader, short answer is they comply with our UDC standards. Both projects do. This project is required to provide a minimum of 1 site amenity, and then Sky Mesa to the north had amenities in excess of UDC standards. So both projects would standalone comply with the amenity and open space requirements. Does that answer your question?
Mayor, follow-up.
Councilwoman Schrader.
And so if you removed the slope piece of the open space, do we know what the percentage of open space would be that is actually usable?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Strader, I can't answer that. The applicant can probably answer that. With that area, it was 21%. Hopefully they can respond to that in their presentation.
Thank you.
So just a question kind of following up on that point in time. If the amenities from the other two are being calculated, or being somewhat brought into the consideration, is the open space from those two also being part of that conversation? Or is the number you just provided standalone for this property?
Mr. Mayor, Council, the number I just provided is standalone for this project.
Okay. Any idea on the other two? And maybe the applicant can address what the other two's open space is in each of those properties. If we're somewhat considering these all one, at least that would give an apples to apples comparison perhaps for council.
Mr. Mayor, Council, I don't know the exact calcs. I know they are also exceeding UDC standards. The applicant can probably address that.
Are there any other questions for staff at this point in time? Okay, the applicant can please come forward. State your name and address for the record when you're there.
And Mr. Mayor, as he's approaching, I might add that we need everyone who speaks tonight to speak directly into the microphone. It's one of those unique things where we've got people off-site and people want to hear. So just a reminder. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name's Todd Tucker, and I represent the developer of this property. Our business address is 729 South Bridgeway Place in Eagle, Idaho, 83616. We're pleased to present these applications tonight, and we just wanted to thank your staff, specifically Sonia, for all of her hard work on this application, and for everyone else at the city, specifically the City Council, for allowing this hearing to go on tonight as well. As Sonia noted, we're requesting annexation with a zoning of R4, and there's an associated preliminary plat application for a residential subdivision with 75 detached single-family lots. Sonia did a good job of covering the annexation and rezone requests, so I'll skip to the preliminary plat and a few items we wanted to discuss regarding some of the conditions of approval. This image shows the proposed subdivision will fit in with the surrounding development. The total size of the subdivision is 30.5 acres. There will be 75 residential lots, and one of those is currently improved with a home and accessory buildings. There are 10 common lots with approximately 6.5 acres of qualified open space, which is approximately 21.5% of the subdivision. And the average lot size is just under 11,000 square feet. To try to answer some of the questions that Councilmember Strader had earlier, as far as if the slope areas were removed from the calculation, I don't have that number off the top of my head, what it would drop it to. I think it's not quite 10%, but it's really close to being 10%. But what we're providing is 21.5%, which is 11.5% over what's required. And although those areas are sloped, we are providing a walking path on the middle one that will be flat, that people can use to walk on to get through the development. So there will be a pedestrian path in one of those areas at the bottom that's a little bit flatter. And as far as some of the discussion about the open space and the rest of Sky Mesa, we don't have that information as far as total acreage of open space in the rest of Sky Mesa. We didn't really do that calculation or plan on providing that information for this, because what we're proposing in this subdivision complies with the development code, and standalone on its own, it complies with that, those standards. So hopefully that answers some of the questions that you had. But again, we're providing 11.5% over what the minimum standard is. Even though some of that is in a slope, part of that is usable as well. The average lot size is just under 11,000 square feet. Here are a few examples of the types of homes that we'll be constructing within the subdivision. As you can see on this map, this goes into more of the discussion of the amenities. The Sky Mesa Highlands subdivision is outlined in red. The other phases of Sky Mesa project are outlined in blue. Those phases have already been approved and mostly developed. The amenities have been installed. 2 parcels highlighted in green are large community amenities that have already been constructed. Since Sky Mesa Highlands is another phase of the Sky Mesa development, all of the residents within Sky Mesa Highlands will be able to use the amenities in the rest of Sky Mesa. Here's a few shots of what those amenities look like. Sonia mentioned it, but I'll go over it again. There's 2 swimming pools with 2 clubhouses, playground equipment, open fields that can be used for playing soccer, football, other ball fields. There's a basketball court and a swing set, and all of these amenities are within walking distance from the Sky Mesa Highlands subdivision. There are really just 3 conditions that we have concern with and would like to provide some alternative language that would allow the development to continue forward while still protecting the city's interest. Those issues are maintaining the existing access onto Eagle Road for the existing home, building height in the scenic easement, and the Grimmett lateral remaining open along the western boundary of the subdivision. The first item is a requirement to remove the existing access to Eagle Road for Lot 29, Block 1. This is an existing parcel of land that's improved with a home and a few accessory buildings. There are no changes proposed to the property at this time, and the owner of the property needs to keep the existing access onto Eagle Road for the functionality of the property and the residents that live in the home. The photos on the left show what the property looks like from the street, and the image on the right is an aerial photo. Just wanted to point out there is a condition of approval that we extend the sidewalk in front of this home and the landscape buffer. And we're willing to do that, just exclude it from the areas where the existing drive aisles meet or come onto Eagle Road. So we're good with that, and our landscape plan reflects that reflects that change. I do have Travis Hunter with me here to discuss the importance of keeping the access onto Eagle Road open. So I'll allow a few minutes for him to address that issue.
Thank you. If you could state your name and address for the record.
Yeah, my name is Travis Hunter with the applicant, and our address is 729 South Bridgeway Place in Eagle. Good evening again, Mr. Mayor and council members, and thanks for hearing us in this time right now. So just the background on this parcel that we're requesting the waiver on is a 1 acre lot with a single family home accompanied by 3 other outbuildings. It's occupied by long-term tenants and is owned by the family trust of which the seller is a member. When we originally submitted our application, we did not include this parcel as we are not purchasing it, we are not developing it, nor do we control it. This property is not owned by the same entity as the seller. It has a separate parcel number and is taxed separately than the parcel we are purchasing. Staff advised us that the process requires us to include this parcel in the application because when the parcel was subdivided, I believe in 1984-ish, it was not part of a formal application with local government. So at that point, we went back to the seller and told him that we needed to include this parcel in the application. He became concerned that if we included this parcel in the application, that it would lose access to Eagle Road. We then went back to staff and asked them if this parcel would be required to eliminate its access from Eagle Road, and staff informed us that the decision was not up to them, but it was up to you guys if you were willing to grant a waiver on this or not. As there are long-term older tenants in this home, and the property and the buildings would lose their function if the access to Eagle Road was eliminated, the seller had us write a contingency into the purchase stating that if access to this parcel from Eagle Road was required to be removed, he could nullify the sale. So we have discussed this issue with ACHD, and ACHD has agreed that this parcel can retain access to Eagle Road until the time at which it redevelops. No neighbors nor any other party that we have talked to have been opposed to this property maintaining its access to Eagle Road. Anyway, so this item, it's a deal breaker for us, and we would greatly appreciate the help of the City Council in granting us this waiver.
The next item to discuss is the scenic easement and the additional language the Planning and Zoning Commission added to create a condition of approval. We have an agreement with Mr. Cantrell, who currently owns the property, that the peaks of our homes will be a minimum of 5 feet below the pad elevation of his home. The Planning and Zoning Commission added language that would require the peaks of the homes be 5 feet below not just Mr. Cantrell's home, but all of the 3 adjacent neighbors. We're in agreement that their views need to be protected also. However, we have a very tight grading plan that will need to be altered if we apply that same standard to Mr. Cantrell's neighbors. As such, we would like to offer an amendment to the condition that would still require the peaks be a minimum of 5 feet below Mr. Cantrell's pad, but would only require the homes be no higher than the neighbors' pads. And I've provided an illustration here on the screen. You can see that the blue dashed line is the pad elevation of the neighbors' homes, and the roofs of our homes would not go above that line. The red line is the line of sight of an average height person standing on the pad, and you can see that they see over the homes. I would also like to point out that there's quite a bit of distance between the backs of the homes of the adjacent neighbors and the homes that we would be constructing because of the slope, the right-of-way, and the setbacks. As you can see, there's approximately 275 feet between the front of the homes that we would be constructing and the backs of the homes adjacent to Mr. Cantrell. There's also a fairly significant drop in elevation. And so with those two items, we feel that what we're proposing is to not have the peaks of our homes go above the base elevation or the pad elevation of those homes, just not be the 5 feet below what the current pad elevation of the neighbors is.
I'm sorry, I can't hear the applicant at all. This is Jessica.
Did she say she can't hear me? Okay. So I'll just summarize what I said. We are proposing that the peaks of our homes still be 5 feet below Mr. Cantrell's pad elevation, just not 5 feet below the neighbor's pad elevations. We're proposing that our homes be no higher than their pad elevations, but just not 5 feet below. It would require a complete rework of our grading plan for the entire subdivision. It's fairly tight, and we designed this based on the agreement that we had with Mr. Cantrell. But we can achieve the fact that we would not have any of our roof peaks extend above their pad elevation, just not the 5 feet below. Our last issue is with the requirement to pipe the Grimmett lateral as it runs along the western boundary of the subdivision. We're requesting to leave this portion of the lateral open. We feel it would be a nice amenity for the homes that abut it. The images on the left show what the lateral looks like now without any water. We would like to note that this lateral is very shallow and will be fully fenced on both sides with no gates into the residential lots. The Planning and Zoning Commission did agree with our request and recommend removing this condition. So in summary, we are in agreement with the staff report with the exception of a few conditions of approval, which I noted. I've provided on the screen our suggested revisions to the 3 conditions that we have an issue with. Again, we feel that the modified conditions achieve the intent of the city ordinances and will allow the project to move forward and be a great addition to this area. That concludes my presentation. I can stand for any questions that the council might have.
Thank you. Council, any questions?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
try and help expedite these. I've been taking some questions from council members that I'll be reading out, so it makes it a little easier for us all to be able to hear. So Councilmember Byrne had inquired, in the letter from the Southern Rim Coalition, they inquired about some of the natural grasses that exist on the slope and ultimately who's going to be responsible for those, both, I guess, during the construction and then afterwards.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Cavanagh via Councilmember Burt, those open space areas will be owned and maintained by the homeowners association. Again, like Sonia noted, we are required to plant life on there that meets the UDC code. So we will be planting vegetation on there and a few trees so that it qualifies as open space. But that area will be owned and maintained by the homeowners association.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Councilmember Strader was hoping to get some additional information if you know about where the students from these neighborhoods, what schools they'll attend. There's some concern that maybe these students would go to Hillsdale or Mountain View, which are severely over capacity. Councilmember Strader indicates we didn't receive any formal communication from West Ada, so hoping that you might be able to provide some additional insight.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Cavanagh via Councilmember Strader. I'll try to do the best I can with answering those questions. That question about schooling, we didn't receive formal comments from the West Ada School District. Right now, from what I understand, Hillsdale Elementary is over capacity and they're not accepting new students. Any current students can continue to go there, but new students are being bused to other schools. And from what I understand, again, it's based on which side of Eagle Road you live on. If you're on the west side of Eagle Road, I think they're going to Sienna, which is not very far away. If you're on the east side of Eagle Road, I think they're busing them to another school, which is a little bit of a greater distance away. But as of right now, again, we haven't received anything from West Ada School District voicing a concern about this, but we have heard that Hillsdale is not accepting new students until a new school is built in the area, and from what we understand right now, they'll be going to Sienna.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
This one's for me. So I'm curious about condition A1E. What geographic barrier doesn't exist with Mr. Cantrell's property that exists with his neighbors that is preventing you from being able to do the same thing for the other people that live there that you're willing to do for Mr. Cantrell?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Cavanagh, Mr. Cantrell's lot is higher than all of the others. His base elevation is 2760. The neighbor directly to the west and the furthest neighbor to the east, their elevations are at 2758. So they're 2 feet below Mr. Cantrell. And then Mr. Patel's property, the furthest to the west, is at 2754. So he's 6 feet below Mr. Cantrell. So the reason why it would affect an overall redo of our grading plan is Mr. Cantrell's pad is actually a little bit higher. Not a lot higher, but a little bit higher than the other neighbors. And so we would have to lower our entire site even more to accommodate that 5-foot difference between the tops of our homes and the neighbors' homes. And again, just to point out that there's quite a bit of distance between these homes and quite a bit of a slope. And still, even if it doesn't go above their pad elevation, you would literally have to lay on your stomach on the ground to have that affect you. If you're standing on the pad, you're going to be anywhere from 5 to 5.5 feet above that base pad elevation and be able to still look over those homes.
Mr. Mayor, follow-up.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Todd, on the screen in front of us, it's got your phasing plans, and it shows those, I think, those 5 neighbors. Which one of those is Mr. Cantrell's? Is the one that's the furthest to the east?
No, Mr. Cantrell's is right in the middle.
Okay.
So there's 5 of them. His is right in the middle. The parcel directly to the east of his is vacant, also owned by Mr. Cantrell. And then there's 2 on the west and 1 furthest to the east.
Thank you very much.
Are there any further questions for the applicant? Just one question I did have was on the access for the property that's being, so I read the condition as basically not having one point of access on that property, but the entire access would remain exactly as is. Am I reading that correct? And if so, is there a reason why there could not just be one access point instead of what looks to be like 70 feet, 60 feet of access?
Mr. Mayor, you are correct. The way we view it, there's really 3 accesses. They're broken up by some landscape buffers, landscape breaks in there. And the reason why all of the accesses we're requesting to remain is the accessory buildings house some fairly large equipment, and so larger trucks with trailers need to get in and be able to circulate through that property, and just making it more functional for them to get in and out of the property would be beneficial for them. We might be able to look at closing the middle one, but at least 2 would really be to maintain the functionality of the property with how it's being used and the equipment being stored in the large outbuildings. It would be beneficial to leave it remain the way it is. We're fully in agreement that once that property redevelops in the future, that access would be closed onto Eagle Road. But as it sits right now, our request is to have it remain the way it is now and the way it's been for many, many years.
Thank you. I guess my only kind of response is we've seen other properties along Eagle Road redevelop. Same situation, Thousand Springs, where you have the original property owner that everything developed around them, and the original property is there with a single access point. You also have this road that is slated to be developed to widened to a 5-lane road before too long. So I understand the premise. I just question whether it's a smart place to have such a wide space of access along this area, but I only bring that up for consideration in the conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else from council?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Councilmember Pro sent in a couple other questions. Todd, she's asking share more about the decision to use vinyl fencing around the common lots versus like a see-through fencing. She's just curious about what views someone will have while they're walking on the pathway.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Cavanagh, the reason that we decided to go with the solid vinyl fencing on the north side of the pathway, on the backyards of those homes, would really be, it's really for the privacy of those homeowners, recognizing that that pathway, because of the slope and the limited distance that we have to fit the pathway in, that pathway is going to be just 5 feet off the rear property lines of those homes. And so to provide them with a little bit of privacy on those lots, that's why we're proposing the 4-foot solid fence with the 2-foot open above. That complies with the code, but it provides those residents a little bit of privacy from the walking path, or the people on the path. Again, that path, the lot that the path is in is rather wide and has a slope, and there won't be a fence on the other side of the pathway. It's just on the north side against the property owners, those lots that are directly abut it to the north. So that's why we decided to go with the 4 feet with the 2-foot open is for privacy of those residents.
Mr. Mayor, one additional, if I may.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Councilmember Pro also asks if you could just give a synopsis about who will be maintaining the agreement lateral when it's in the common lot, if that's just part of the HOA maintenance, if there's a separate ownership on it.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Cavanagh, that property will be in a common lot that's owned by the homeowners association with an easement within it for the irrigation company to use. So it'll almost be a combo maintenance, us and them for part of it, but mainly the HOA would be maintaining it because it is a common lot owned by the HOA.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any further questions at this time from council? Okay, thank you very much. So this is a public hearing. Is there anybody present who would like to testify in this application? Okay. Does the applicant like to come back up and make any further comments? Okay. Then with that, I'll turn it over to council for discussion or a motion.
Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Hoagland.
Yeah, I wanted to, it sounded like someone was trying to say something. Was that Councilman Strader?
No, that was Councilwoman Perot.
Oh, Councilwoman Perot.
Councilwoman Perot, can you hear me okay?
We can barely hear you.
Mr. Mayor, she's also watching via YouTube, so she is on delay.
Lateral.
I'm sorry?
I will text my question to Councilman Cavanagh.
Okay. It's coming to you, Councilman Cavanagh.
Fair enough. Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Just for conversation kickoff, I know there's been a lot of conversation about counting the slope as open space and should you not, and I'm fine with us counting it open space in part because what I think is that this application comes with it some really great blend of amenities. We could forego some of the other amenities and just put a bunch of green space. But what I really applaud about this project and this whole project in general is it's very community focused and providing a wide community, or providing the community a wide variety of amenities. So while I can understand some of the concern that we'd heard from other folks, I think because of the amenity package that comes with this overall project, that's not a piece that I'm overly concerned with. Just a thought. I've got a few more, but I'll read these notes and convey them here as soon as I can.
And Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
to follow up on that, yeah, it's that slope. I understand the request, but at the same time, it's because it's not truly usable space. But I don't think our UDC, and that was my question to Sonia, distinguishes it from don't count it because it's a slope. And so until we put in definition so developers know the rules, I think we have to count it as open space because it meets what we have in our rules for that. So it's just one of those things that it's unique. We don't have a lot of slope property in Meridian, but there's a few areas in South Meridian and a little bit to the north that we have. But so if that's something we want to work on for future, we need to do that. But for this application, as long as it meets the UDC, then I don't think we can change those.
And if I could just add, I think to the people that may be interested in these properties, I think the slope is the amenity for the open space that creates separation between other homes and allows for vision to their own view shed from that standpoint.
In fact, Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
to follow up on that thought, looking at 275 feet for distance for line of sight, if you think of it in a football field terms, which is 100 yards from goal line to goal line, that's just over 90 yards from the property lines or the lines of sight from where they stand to see the roof of the other side. So I can understand, for the Cantrell pad, they want to be 5 feet below. Okay, they make, we'll agree to that. But having the roof lines not higher than the pad sites for the other homes, that strikes me as being reasonable because of the distance involved. And again, if you're standing there, you're going to be seeing above the roof, and it is at a greater distance, 90 yards. So it's not like it's that close.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
That's why I love council, even though we're doing this remotely, is because I don't necessarily agree with that, where you've got Mr. Cantrell, who's right in the middle. It appears to be between a 2 to 6 feet gap. To me, the recommendation from planning and zoning to be able to do that for all the people that live up there makes sense. And if they're willing to do it for one who I believe is the seller of the lot, to me, it just makes sense that we're doing it for the other homeowners that are going to be impacted as well. If there was a great geographic barrier, honestly, if one was at the edge and we saw a slope go up as we connected further to the west, I would be more supportive of that. But you're talking about the guy that's in the middle, we're going to do that for, but not the neighbors on both sides. And to me, I just think that it's the request was made by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I'm supportive of it.
And Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Hoagland.
Yeah, Councilman Cavanagh certainly brings up an excellent point. And, and I thought about that, but I found it interesting that he owns the property to the east and he didn't make that request for that property. So that's why I was going, well, he wanted something special for his where he lives, and the rest, as long as we provide line of sight, I think that's good. So that to me was kind of the reason why. Let's just make it, for the rest.
Mr. Mayor, yeah. And
Councilman Cavanagh.
sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'm jumping the gun. There was some conversation at the Planning and Zoning Commission where the neighbors thought that was a condition that Mr. Cantrell had made upon the sale of his property. They would do that for all of them. And I could be misreading the minutes, but I believe Mr. Cantrell agreed to that. Now, he's not the applicant, so it's, we're playing a little bit of a game of telephone. But to me, at least, I felt that folks at the Planning and Zoning Commission that attended felt they left believing that was what was going to be happening for them. Which, Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
could also result as to why, in addition to our issues, why nobody's here speaking about that this evening.
And if I could just say, I agree with both of you in this case. I don't think that any neighbor is going to tell a 5-foot difference overlooking this space from how far away the homes are legitimately. But at the same time, I also understand if it can be done for one in the middle, it seems to make sense it can be done for all. Are there any questions from our remote council members that you have at this point in time or additional comments for consideration? Mr. Cavanagh.
No, I'm good. Thank you for asking, Mayor.
Thank you.
This is Liz. I have a comment.
Yes, if you can do your best to speak as loud as you can.
Woo, I thought I was speaking really loud, so I am almost shouting now. I am struggling with how overcrowded the schools are in this area, and I am disappointed that we did not receive comments from West Data, but from previous applications, we do know already that Hillsdale Elementary is severely overcrowded, and it seems like with the applications we have already approved this year, we already know we're taking capacity at Mary McPherson, and it appears just from my own back of the envelope calculation that Blue Valley, even if the levy passes, will be full. And I'm really struggling with where to draw a line in the sand. It's important to take a lot of considerations into account with development applications, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we're providing quality for our community, and I think that includes schools that are not overcrowded. So, the thing I'm struggling with here is that, this is the second phase of a development that clearly has been planned in advance. It's not a surprise to anyone. We've known about it. We've known it was coming, but, I just want to be honest that that is my biggest struggle. And I know it's only 75 lots, but I'm in the absence of clear direction from West Ada, I'm really struggling to approve. And that's just speaking for me.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
I think Councilmember Strader brings up a good point, and I think at the very least, we should at least let the applicant provide, I guess, maybe a question about their phasing plan, build plan, just so that council is aware of kind of how soon they plan to construct, what those plans look like in terms of timetable. If anything, to be able to have a good understanding about how many potential homes could roll out over the next year to 2 years to 5 years. And then, Mr. Mayor, also, Councilmember Perot had also texted me, and let me find it. She was trying to ask a question about why the applicant decided to change the request to waive the common lot requirement versus leaving the easement in buildable lots for the homeowner to maintain. Todd, I know that's a lot, so I can repeat it again if you want. It's over 2 texts, so it took me a minute to get it all. I recognize you were walking up here as I was asking.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Cavanagh, if I could answer the first question first about estimated time of when homes would come online. We're estimating the end of 2021. That is if status stays the way it is right now. We're all in weird times and we don't know what the economy is going to do. So as of right now, our best guess is we could possibly have homes coming online at the end of 2021, and that's if everything stays normal. And then if you could please re-ask or state the other questions for me.
Thanks, Todd. Councilmember Perot had asked why the applicant decided to change the request to waive the common lot requirement versus leaving the easement in buildable lots for the homeowners to maintain.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Cavanagh, after discussion and after talking about it internally, we just felt it was fine. If the city's requirement is to place them in a, sorry, I should be closer to the mic. If the city's code requires that these canals be placed in common lots, it did not affect the size of our lots. We like to have deep backyards. And it still allowed us to have the same depth of backyard that we wanted because the canal company would require that we fence them anyway. So it still allows the usable backyard that we like. We're fine with complying with the code and leaving those in common lots as the code requires. So before we were asking to be able to put them in the backyards, we just felt that it would be a better sense of ownership, but the city code requires them to be in common lots. It didn't affect the backyards, the sizes of the lots really, and so we're fine with complying with the code.
Thanks.
Council, any further questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor, I don't have any, and I just wanted, we're giving pause to hear if anybody else had any issues.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh?
maybe, I know that our three other council members are muted, but maybe just if they could give us some type of signal they don't have any more comments or questions so that maybe we could move towards closing the public hearing.
While we're waiting, I guess I would just want one clarification from the applicant. If I heard correctly, there was potential to shut down one of what you would describe as 3 access points or one giant access. If redevelopment of that property were to ever occur, would they both remain on 1 or 2? I think having 2 defined access points would be better than having one wide open access point in that property. Do you know where I heard you say maybe the middle one that's there? What is the thoughts of the applicant to this point?
Mr. Mayor, that was my thought, that if there was anywhere to give, or if you weren't comfortable with the 3, if one of them needed to be closed, to me, the middle one makes the most sense because the northern one and southern one still would allow for easy access through the development. But I probably should let Travis handle this one, answer this question. He's been more in contact with the Cantrells on this issue and maybe can provide a more clear answer than I am. I was just talking from my own perspective. It seemed like the middle one, if you were going to decide one of them had to be closed, to me, the middle one made the most sense as far as maintaining functionality, but I probably ought to let Travis handle this one.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
and while he's coming up, could we have staff put that particular picture up that shows the property? That would be helpful.
Which property is that?
The existing home that's along Eagle Road, Mr. Mayor.
Slide 8.
It's the Eagle Road one.
Yeah, I probably don't have a more clear answer than Todd without speaking with the seller. But for them, it was like I said prior, they have long-term tenants in there that have been using these buildings, and so it has to do with the usability of it. I would have to ask the seller that question to give you a defined answer. But if access is removed, they can exit the escrow.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
can you help walk me through the concern about the 3 accesses on this particular lot right now as it pertains to the application? I'm just trying to kind of see things through your eyes.
My concern is not in light of this application, it's just long-term. This will be a 5-lane road, and I want to say 3 years per ACHD, if I'm not mistaken, is when they plan on doing that. Not knowing what type of operations and what type of vehicles are entering and exiting out of the property at any given point in time, and not having, because just the way the condition reads is basically saying you're going to maintain it as it is, which says you're going to have a curb cut for maybe one curb cut, maybe 2 curb cuts, maybe 3 curb cuts along this entire frontage of this property, the way I read it. And I think it's better for the community and public to know where someone may enter or exit from a property as compared to an area where people may exit from a property.
Yeah.
That's my main concern.
Got it. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
just to pontificate, I guess, on this, ACHD was fine with that. Typically with existing properties, in my experience, we've allowed that to remain until such time that property gets sold and gets absorbed by the development, and a lot of time that is facilitated by the expansion of the road that they're on. And if the sidewalk is right out their front door, or even the street in some instances, and it becomes time. So, and with it being gravelled all like it is, it's pretty much just kind of wide open. I definitely see 2 access points, and maybe they'll pull a trailer out from the one looking at that top left picture. But it's just one of those things as we transition from rural to urban. How do we handle these properties? And they seem like they're case by case, and it doesn't give me any heartburn to leave it as is until such time it becomes time for it to be redeveloped.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burnt?
I just wanted to clarify that when the Cantrells sell the property, will Boise Hunter will Boise Hunter assume this property and then they'll redevelop it?
Let the applicant answer that question.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Burnt, this property, although included in the subdivision, is not part of our purchase. So we will not be acquiring this property at this time. It will still remain owned by the Cantrells. And that's why there's so much concern about removing the accesses, as Travis said, because the Cantrells are maintaining ownership of this property. If access is removed onto Eagle Road, they have the ability to cancel the entire deal, and all 3 accesses will remain there because they continue ownership of the property. So the accesses will not go away if we don't develop the property either, because they maintain ownership of that. I see on my screen it says unmuted. I thought it said muted. I just want to make sure I wasn't saying that with it being muted. So just wanted to point that out, that we will not be taking ownership of that lot. It will be located within the subdivision, but the Cantrells, or a trust actually, a family trust that owns that property, will maintain ownership of that property.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Hoagland.
Mr. Tucker, while you're up there, I think, Sonia, if you could bring up their plat. I wanted to ask you about a property. Let's see, there was one that showed, yes, here we go, thank you. Therein would be the southwest corner of the Cantrell property. You have some green space and whatnot, an open lot, basically. Is that for possible access point in the future?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Hoagland, yes. So if you'll notice, directly to the north of the Cantrells, we've extended the common driveway that provides access to those lots all the way down to that property. Because of the distance of that, it would need to continue through. And so that green space that you're talking about is an open common lot that in the future would have a emergency connection coming out of that, so that if the fire department has to go down that cul-de-sac and down the common driveway to access those lots, when the Cantrells property develops in the future, that common driveway would extend down and then connect out back to the public street. So it provides secondary access for the fire department. But yes, that is open space with the future connection of an emergency vehicle access out of that. And the reason why we extended that common driveway down, at this point it runs right into the side of a accessory building, but our thought was in the future, if it redevelops, you could get 2, possibly 3, depending on the size of the lots there. Those would then turn, and the fronts of the lots would be on the west side, closing access on Eagle Road, and they would use that common driveway for their access.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And just to follow up on that, so when these properties redevelop, they must redevelop and become part of this subdivision? Is that the way I'm interpreting your comments?
Mr. Mayor, I don't know that they would necessarily be part of the subdivision of Phase 2 of Sky Mesa Highlands, but they would have to take access from internal. Whether we develop it or someone else develops it, the access onto Eagle Road would be removed at that time, and they would need to come from an internal access from our subdivision. Okay. Again, whether we are the developer or someone else is developing it, they would have to come from internal.
Thank you. That at least alleviates some of my long-term concerns with this property, because I was assuming a redevelopment would occur that would still be Eagle-facing from this standpoint, which would also be the access issue.
Mr. Mayor, no, the proposed language that we have basically states that access can stay on Eagle Road as it is now until such time as that property is redeveloped, and then access must come internal from the development.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, before Mr. Tucker leaves,
Councilman Hoagland.
we have to make sure here, so your scenario doesn't come true, because that is an issue. If the property sells to another owner, does that constitute redevelopment?
Mr. Mayor, I would not say so. I would say it's just a change in ownership. It would be if they want to come in and change the nature of the property, whether it be subdivide it, remove all of the existing structures and build a new single-family home. I think a change in the property would be constituted redevelopment, not just change in ownership.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Tucker, thank you for that. That's my opinion as well.
Thank you. Council, any further comments or questions? Or any motions to close the public hearing?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
I move we close the public hearing on item 7A, H-2019-0123.
Second?
I have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Cavanagh.
Take a stab at this and see where it goes. Appreciate the conversation here and online. I still am not comfortable with modifying A1E, so I would move that we approve item 7A, annexation and zoning application H2019-0123, include all staff and applicant testimony, taking into account the access along Eagle Road, A2A and A3A remain upon redevelopment, or remain until redevelopment, as well as the waiver of UDC 113A6B3 that waives the piping of the lateral. Making sure staff isn't giving me any flags. Good with that?
Mr. Mayor, can I clarify the motion, please?
Yes, Councilman Burnt.
So just to clarify on item A1E, we're saying that we're not going to require anything in regard to that modification.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Cavanagh.
Appreciate the question, Councilmember Burt. I guess what I was meaning is that we would leave it as recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission, which would be to create, I think, a 5-foot separation between the pad and the roof lines of the view shed of the neighbors below the existing residence.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
I have a motion. Do I have any second on the motion?
I would second the motion.
Okay, thank you. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Mayor, it's Liz.
Councilwoman Schrader.
Hopefully everyone can hear me. I am going to be a no vote tonight, and I just want to be able to explain. Hopefully everyone heard my commentary earlier. In the absence of a clear plan from West Ada for additional students in this area, when we are so clearly overcrowded, I do not feel good about approving this. And so I will be a no vote tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you, Councilwoman Schrader. Are there any other comments or discussion on the motion from council?
Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Councilwoman Perot.
I have had so many challenges with the technology tonight that I feel like I've missed at least a third of what has been said. So I'm deciding if it's appropriate for me to vote at this time. I've gone between having YouTube up and listening through my PC versus listening on my phone. For some reason, the call has dropped a couple of times. And so I apologize to the applicant, but I have not heard completely everything that has been said. So I would say that I understand Councilwoman Strader's concerns regarding the schools, and I have some hesitations in that regard as well. But that's really all the comment that I'm going to make at this time, because I don't feel like that I've been able to hear everything clearly enough tonight to take a vote. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you, Councilwoman Pro, for sharing that information. Councilman Burnt, do you have any comments or that you'd like to make at this point in time?
No, sir, I'm ready to roll.
Okay. Are there any additional comments from council? If not, we have a motion and a second. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cavanagh?
Aye.
Perot is abstaining, correct?
That's correct.
Strader? Councilwoman Strader?
No.
Hoagland?
Aye.
Burnt?
Aye.
Item passes 3-1. Council, can we take a quick little 5-minute break before we'll start the next one at 7:30? So we are adjourned till 7:30. Recess.
Thank you. Thank you.
Liz, Jessica, Treg, you are still live in the room, even though the microphones are muted. Just wanted to give you that fair warning.
Thanks for the heads up, Chris. I've been on mute, so I'm good to go. Thanks for the heads up, though.
Liz is back.
We'll come back from recess. Next item on the agenda is item 7B, public hearing for Almond subdivision, H 2019-0135. I'll turn this over for staff comments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The next application before you is a request for annexation and zoning and a preliminary plat. This site consists of 9.91 acres of land. It's owned RUT in Ada County and is located at 5885 and 5875 North Locust Grove Road. The comprehensive plan future land use map designation is medium density residential, which calls for 3 to 8 dwelling units per acre. The applicant requests annexation of 10.03 acres of land with R8 zoning for the development of single-family residential detached homes consistent with the medium-density residential future land use designation. A preliminary plat is proposed consisting of 50 building lots and 7 common lots on 9.91 acres of land in the proposed R8 zoning district. The minimum lot size proposed is 4,161 square feet with an average lot size of 4,692 square feet. The gross density is 5.08 units per acre with a net density of 6.11 units per acre. The subdivision is proposed to develop in one phase. There are 2 existing homes and accessory structures on the site that are proposed to be removed with development. Access is proposed via the extension of existing stub streets from the north and south boundaries of the site. Direct access via North Locust Grove Road is not proposed or approved. Off-street parking is required in accord with UDC standards as shown based on the number of bedrooms per unit. A parking plan was submitted, as shown, that depicts a total of 37 available on-street parking spaces for guest parking. Minimum of 10% or 0.99 of an acre of qualified open space is required to be provided with development of the subdivision. 1.62 acres or 16.6% is proposed, consisting of linear open space where pathways are located, the common area where a community garden is proposed, and half the street buffer along Locust Grove Road. A minimum of 1 qualified site amenity is required to be provided, a community vegetable garden with 6 8 feet by 12 feet planter boxes, a loop pedestrian pathway around the perimeter of the development, a rose garden with a stone sitting bench, and a meditation garden with a bubbling rock and a stone sitting bench are proposed as amenities in excess of UDC standards. A 10-foot wide detached multi-use pathway is also proposed along Locust Grove Road. Conceptual renderings were submitted of the types of homes planned to be constructed in this development as shown. Homes are a single story in height with a variety and mix of finished materials with stone and brick veneer accents. Some units may have a second level bonus room built into the roof structure but appear as a single level with no windows facing the rear yard. To mitigate the lack of transition in lot sizes from adjacent developments at the perimeter boundary, the applicant is proposing homes be limited to 25 feet in height and to essentially restrict homes to a single story, with the allowance of a bonus room to be built into the roof structure and no windows facing the rear yard. The commission recommended approval of this project. Dean Waite, Todd Campbell Construction testified in favor. Renee Hansen, Judy Kaye, Jerry Munzer testified in opposition. Tyler Roundtree, Ron Need, Valerie McElrath, and Matthew Storch commented on the application, and written testimony was received from Jim and Phyllis Lemieux, Renee, no last name, David and Ann Henchman, Dean and Renee Hansen, and Jim and Kathy Sears. The key issues of the public testimony are as follows: concerns pertaining to traffic impact on adjacent neighborhoods and safety of neighborhood children with more traffic, preference for direct access for the subdivision via Locust Grove Road instead of sending traffic through adjacent existing neighborhoods, concern there may be a delay in emergency response without a direct access via Locust Grove Road, preference for this area to be open space or community park, opinion that zoning should be R4 instead of R8 and that density and lot sizes should match that in surrounding developments, and finally concern pertaining to difference in elevation of the subject property compared to that of abutting developments in relation to the perimeter walking path, and if there will be a retaining wall or something to stabilize existing fences. Key issues of discussion by the commission were as follows: concern pertaining to on-street parking availability and trash service, where to put the carts for homes at the end of the cul-de-sac at the east end of the subdivision. The public's request for direct access to Locust Grove Road, transition in lot sizes and density from adjacent developments to this site, and impact of R4 zoning instead of R8 on the proposed development plan, preference for R4 zoning and development. Opinion that the single-level patio homes will cater to an older population with fewer children, which will have a lesser impact on traffic than a typical development. Concern pertaining to traffic in this area and level of service F on Locust Grove Road. And finally, in favor of the quality of development proposed in the common areas with pathways proposed to buffer and transition from adjacent lots. The Commission made the following change to the staff recommendation. They included a condition to reduce the number of buildable lots by 5 to no more than 45 lots and to have no more than 6 lots off the cul-de-sac on the eastern portion of the development. The outstanding issue for council tonight is that the applicant did not make the changes to the plat requested by the commission, as they feel the concessions they've already made more than justify the transition from larger lot sizes to those proposed. And those concessions include the following: landscape buffers along north and south boundaries, far exceeding the minimum qualified open space and site amenity standards, and limitation on the height of homes to 25 feet, i.e. single story. Written testimony has been received since the commission. Several letters were submitted within the last couple days from Brandon Morse, Carl Patton, Judy Kaye, Joe and Leah Sackerman, Tracy Servadius, and Albert and Marilyn Castanola. They have concerns pertaining to traffic impact on their neighborhoods resulting from traffic from this development without an access via Locust Grove. Opinion that Meridian needs to deal with its existing infrastructure and taxation before approving any more developments, which result in overcrowded schools, roads, and wastewater systems. And preference for R4 instead of R8 zoning to reduce the number of lots and subsequent traffic. Written testimony was also submitted from John and Pam Marsh, Ryan Moore, Craig Telford, Paul Silva, all residents of the Reserve subdivision that abuts this property, in support of the project and the quality of homes proposed within the development. And finally, from Rodney and MJ Bates, in support of the project per the Commission's recommendation to reduce the number of lots in the cul-de-sac. Staff for any questions?
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff at this point in time?
No, Mayor, thank you.
Okay. If not, I'll ask the applicant to please come forward. State your name and address for the record, please.
Is this the mic you prefer? Is it working better than the other? Get up on it. Okay. Mayor, City Council members, my name is Dean Waite. My address is 4283 Nystrom Way. Thank you for your time this evening, and big thank yous to Sonia and the rest of the planning and zoning staff that assisted us through this process. Almond subdivision will be marketed as the Cottages at Serenity Gardens. Serenity Gardens is designed around neighbors connecting and enjoying their community together. Our target market wants to be proud of where they live. They want beautification. They want community. At Serenity Gardens, as stated, oh, where's my mouse? Up is down and down is up, I guess. Oh, never mind. The mouse is upside down. That was funny. As Sonia stated, we actually, part of our amenity is actual gardens. We will have a vegetable garden, 2 separate flower gardens, and heavily landscaped all of our open space areas. These, along with the landscaped pathways that were discussed, and proposed open wrought iron rear fencing in the yards, we think will all blend to community togetherness, people enjoying the outdoor space that we are going to create here. I'd like to give a little background of us as it speaks to the infill type development that we are doing. Todd Campbell Construction began in 1999 with the development of an infill project, Riley Village. And then the following years, we did several other projects in Northwest Boise, and we've done 10 infill type developments similar to this in Boise and Meridian, beginning in 1999. These are just some of the other samples of other developments that we have done in the area. When this property came to market, we knew it fit in our wheelhouse. It was similar to other infill type properties that we purchased, and knew it would be one of our great communities. Mayor Simison, you have recently been quoted as stating that Meridian's #1 growth priority should be with infill projects. We do agree that infill projects are the best way for Meridian to grow. Through our development experience, we have learned that there are some inherent challenges that are specific to infill projects. Infill is almost always resisted by surrounding property owners. You've heard some of those voices tonight. You've also heard many supportive voices of those in properties directly adjacent to this. Infill is also expensive. The land and development costs in infill are almost always more than that of the open land development that has happened around them. And then fitting infill projects into the spaces left by the open land development is also takes some creativity and is a specific challenge to infill. For this project, we've attempted and I believe overcome these challenges to create a beautiful neighborhood that we think many Meridian citizens will enjoy. And I present the cottages at Serenity Gardens. Maybe?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Burnt?
I don't mean to interrupt, but the applicant is fading, going in and out. It's somewhat difficult to catch everything that he's saying. Is there a possibility that he can actually maybe gobble the mic in his mouth or maybe use the other mic?
Todd Tucker might have the disease. I want to be careful. No.
We will try our best.
I'm sorry. When I looked down at my screen, I think I was backing away. I'll try to be more cognizant of that.
That's much better. Thank you.
As stated, open space was an important emphasis in planning Serenity Gardens. For our project to work financially, we knew we needed to be at a higher density than the surrounding properties. To help this transition, we are proposing 60% more open, actually 66% more open space than required by the Meridian UDC. As this video rendering progresses, you'll see that open space in our detached sidewalks, walking paths, and the garden areas. Let me pause that. From this angle, you can see some of that. So not only, we have the building setback that comes with any development, but we're proposing 25 feet of open space landscape buffer all along this southern boundary and the northern boundary. That's a little bit better view of what we're proposing there. We also have the 35-foot landscape buffer along Locust Grove, and including the 10-foot pathway that includes the ability to have two-way traffic moving safely across the pathway there. These additional open space above their requirements are a significant cost to the developer, to us the developer, but we do believe that they are a great value both to us and to the surrounding property owners. The homes represented here in this video are actual plans that we have prepared that fit on the lots that we are proposing. Colors, finishing touches, the specific floor plan selections will be determined by the market, but these are the specific plans that we have prepared so far. You can see that we are proposing single-level homes only. We do agree with the concession that was proposed by planning and zoning to have the limitation, the height limitation, and to have no windows if we do bonus rooms. None of the plans we have planned have bonus rooms, but none of the plans that we have drawn so far do have bonus rooms, but we do reserve the right to have those in the proposal. This just gives you a little bit better perspective of that 25-foot landscaped buffer that we are proposing with the pathway through it. As you can see, with the rear yards being the open wrought iron style and with gates in them accessing it. We want to promote community togetherness using of your amenity actually. And we know sometimes you do a subdivision with an amenity that does not get used. We feel that our target market will enjoy and appreciate this amenity very much. There are more than 5,000 feet of walking path throughout this development. That's nearly a mile in just a under 10-acre development. That is pretty impressive for this size of development. Serenity Gardens speaks to that request of Mayor Simison to focus on infill development. This project, as proposed, includes many significant and costly upgrades from what is required by Meridian UDC and from the standards of some of the surrounding developments. We make these proposals because we want to create a beautiful neighborhood. We want people to enjoy what we've created, and we also want to be a good neighbor to the surrounding communities. Mayor, members of the City Council, we do agree that infill is a smart way to grow Meridian. The cottages at Serenity Gardens both addresses that priority and will meet a significant market need. We ask that you approve this application as proposed, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Council, any questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Cavanagh.
Dean, appreciate you being here. Just want to get a sense. You ended your presentation by talking about wanting to be a good neighbor, which I really appreciate, especially with infills. Those always seem to be where we need to lead. I'm curious if you and your client are supportive, because of these uncertain times, maybe continuing this public hearing out to a later point in time to allow your neighbors to be able to come and provide testimony here in person. We've received a lot of correspondence, a very empty room. We've received a lot of correspondence that have alluded to that. I'm just curious if that's something you guys are supportive of.
We would not prefer that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
question for the applicant on this. It sounds like there was an interesting discussion with the commission regarding buildable lots, and they reduced. Can you show me on the plat what where that reduction would have taken place?
How do I get out of this? Is your presentation still up here?
And Mr. Mayor, I might clarify, whichever one shows it the best, however you want to
Okay.
proceed. So.
In the discussion at the planning and zoning hearing, the specific request was to remove some lots from this cul-de-sac. They did not put that was the discussion. They did not put that, I don't believe, in the specific wording, but I think they asked for 5 to be removed from the wording, and did they say 3, minimum of 3 from the cul-de-sac area? I know there was some discussion back and forth. As I understand it, their request was for 5 lots to be removed from the subdivision.
Mr. Mayor, just a follow-up question.
Councilman Hoagland.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, since that backs up to Locust Grove Road, why it would be there. I mean, that you're not abutting neighbors in that particular area. Do you recall what?
I think the idea, well, I'm putting my guess at their thoughts, but it was more of a traffic issue. They were trying to reduce some traffic, and that's how I understood the discussion flowing. So it wouldn't really matter, I guess, where they were coming from if that was the issue.
And Mr. Mayor, a follow-up?
Councilman Hoagland.
And as to traffic, the streets that you are accessing are 2 stub streets that exist in the current neighborhoods right now. Is that correct?
Yes, when they were developed, they were required to stub to our property.
So there was future ideas of people that eventually this property would develop and there would be access to this additional property.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Councilmember Strader texted in asking for the applicant to please clarify exactly when these homes would be delivered, and if there is any further correspondence that they've had with West Ada outside of the letter that the city council has received.
So these homes would be coming to market sometime next year, 2021, and not specific. Well, there has been other communications with West Ada, but not anything that would pertain to this other than what has been read or provided to the city council.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Dean, what about you talk about the community garden. We've seen some neighborhoods who've done community gardens really well and some that have become kind of glorified litter boxes. So who ultimately is responsible for the maintenance, the planting, the harvesting of the community garden?
So in another community we have here in Meridian, where we do have a successful community garden, we, the HOA, maintain it and then maintain outside the boxes and do weeding off-season. And then we let the homeowners maintain the boxes as far as planting, harvesting, and that is determined within the HOA itself, the members of it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
This is a public hearing. Did we have anyone sign up to testify?
Mr. Mayor, we did not activate the sign up since we didn't know what it would be, so we have people in the room.
All right. Well, come on up and state your name and address for the record, please.
Mr. Mayor, members of the Meridian City Council, distinguished city attorney, my name is Steve Rutherford. I'm here on behalf of my wife and I, seated back there. We live at 1539 East Commander, so we live in the reserve, just over the fence, second house in from Locust Grove. And I'm really here, I mean, we're here in support. Really, we appreciate the product Todd produces. We think this is probably going to be a good development. Our real concern is traffic, as you would guess. So we did move in, Councilmember Hoagland. We were, I don't know, probably third people in phase one to move in. We knew the Stubb Street was there and realized that at some point there was going to be some traffic. There are a couple issues. We didn't really realize the density, but we've kind of got our heads around that given the product that Todd's going to build. It's probably not going to be big families with a lot of drivers. But there is a roundabout there, and big trucks, big equipment at early phases of construction is going to be a chore. I don't know if you can get that picture up so you can appreciate, but getting those big trucks around that is going to be a real bear. So our kind of request for the council, realize our preference would be that they have access to Locust Grove, but I get how this works. Fewer connections to big busy streets like Locust Grove is a good thing. But for the purposes of construction, and I'm not sure, you probably would know, as your development services might know, when the trigger point would be, but to use the existing, one of the two existing driveways, they were improved quite a while ago when ACHD did some work there. So they're a pretty good driveway. For purposes of construction, again, into construction, ideally until they're, developing the front closest to Locust Grove, they would use that for their construction access instead of either our street or the one that goes through Saguaro Springs. So that's kind of our one request. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Council, any questions? You can state your name and address for the record, please.
Tyler Roundtree, I live at 1098 East Passaconau over in Arcadia, which abuts to a portion of the, basically lots 52, 53, 54, 5, 6, and 7. Kind of what Steve alluded to, I think we all expected this to develop, and no one's opposed of having homes back there. The response that you got from everybody, I think, deals mostly with the traffic, which is based off of the density. That has been kind of everybody's main concern, and I think as human beings, it's relatively simple for the subdivision people who live surrounding it, which is, we'll just add another entrance. With lots of effort, I don't think you're going to make anybody understand that that's not possible. But it's not. So our request was fairly simple. Is the product good? Yes. Is Todd Campbell a great builder? Absolutely. Have they bent over backwards? Yes. But my question is at what point, what is the obligation of the city to make sure that a developer can come in and develop a parcel that he purchased and make it pencil? So I had a kind of a moral conundrum with this when this started. The Allman family are long residents of Meridian. They've had a lot of property throughout town. If I were him, would I want somebody to come in and say, hey, no, don't sell. You can't put homes here. You can't get your money and go live somewhere on an island and drink drinks with umbrellas in them. And I hope that's what he did. But where's the obligation to, as a homeowner and surrounding this density, to make it pencil? TBC LLC Land Holdings owns the property. Del Alman doesn't own it anymore. So when we started this endeavor in October, it was under contract. And clearly that changed. And here we are. So I think if we got it to R4, like what's surrounding, it would address the traffic issue. We're not going to take care of the concern with Locust Grove, but my math, if we cut it in the density in half, that's half of whatever traffic could be forecasted, simply. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Council, any questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Hoagland.
Council, Tyler, you raise a good point. The other conundrum is when I first read this, and this was new to me, in our comprehensive plan, this was determined to be high density. I don't know how that came about when I look at the surrounding property. So it fits the comprehensive plan, so that puts a little conundrum for me, because we're trying to follow the comprehensive plan, and I was attending the council meetings when that was put together and everything, and so I understand your dilemma, and I think you'll understand my dilemma when we go, okay, we're going to change this when we've done all this work to put together a plan for that. So I guess what's your advice? My question is, what is your advice to us when it comes to that comprehensive plan, and are there exceptions to areas that we should really take into consideration?
I guess at minimum, if you look at what P&Z's suggestion was, albeit depending on how you look at 5, 5 is very impactful to the developer, but in the course of the development, 5 isn't that impactful. That's what their recommendation was. This is a really weird spot. And to your point in 07, if things would have continued in 06, the Rutherfords would probably be living behind or in front of phase 3 of reserve potentially, because the original developer of that parcel ended up selling at auction to get out from underneath it in the downturn of the market in 07, 08. And originally, it would have been R4.
And Mr. Mayor, to follow up, Tyler, that's good insight.
Councilman Hoagland.
And that's the other dilemma we have is markets change, and the R4 is getting very, very expensive. And so is this something that, in your opinion, then should we as a city be approving less of? Because we're getting a lot of these type of requests. Is it just a lot by lot? We're doing these 10 acres and 7 acres and 5 acres, and that's a dilemma too, because that's the market that we're having to deal with, that developers say, hey, and also from our perspective, constituents saying, I can't afford a single family home, I need something smaller, I want something nice. So any advice there?
I guess my response to that would be I'm a single opinion, certainly representing a segment of homes, but I think you would have to lean on what the majority of your responses have been via text, email, voicemail, however they've been supplied to you, and take a cross-section of what everybody's asking for. I think collectively, it isn't an issue with the development per se, but the density. It's the traffic. And the people who live along Commander, we have not seen the impact from the development that's going on currently, particularly Commander, and what the traffic may be. The homes are sitting empty at the present time, but it's about 75% built out. Again, they've bent over backwards. To Dean's point, I agree, they have. But that's what the concerns are, is for the traffic piece. We can't fix the Locust Grove part. That's just not possible.
Thank you, Tyler. Any further questions? Is there anybody else who'd like to testify? State your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Joyce Little, and
You pull your
I
microphone.
am also a realtor.
Can you pull your microphone down so our council?
Okay.
There.
Mayor, council members, being a realtor, I know that obviously the growth is overwhelming to all of us. Even as a realtor, they're all like, oh, you just should be in happy town. And it's not like that. I like to know that we're building communities. And what I see in Todd's product is a community, and the demographic of that buyer is going to be probably your younger professionals, your elderly, your the empty nesters, those type. If the density gets lessened and Todd doesn't build this product, I can see this going to one of the lower end builders, and there's no guarantee that we're going to have less traffic, because if, just say, Corey Barton comes in and builds 25 very large 2-stories that accommodate 4 and 5 bedrooms, they're going to be usually a family with children and teenagers, and there could be actually more traffic, and traffic that is speeding out of our subdivision to get to school. Like my husband mentioned, is that we're the second house in on Commander, and we already have a problem with parents stacking up along our street because they don't want their kids to walk to the bus. And if there's more children that are coming out of that, or teenagers or whatever, I just see that more and more, that we're going to have teenagers running through our streets, or both sides. So I don't think that the density going lower is going to change anything on the traffic. That's my personal opinion, of knowing the product that Todd is building and the demographic that's going to be in that. And then some of those people may only have one car, where there could be 3 or 4 cars. Like right now, my husband and I have 3 cars. The people across the street, they have 5. So, and that's 2 houses out of a 25 subdivision. So that's my point. So, thank you.
Thank you. Council, any questions? Is there anybody else who'd like to testify in this project at this time? All right, if not, have the applicant come back up.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure you didn't close the public hearing. One other item I'd like to address about the community gardens. All exterior landscaping and watering will be maintained by the HOA, so that will be part of that. For the homes, the front and backyards will all be centrally maintained by the development. And that will help with the maintenance of the garden areas. If we can get it approved, we love the idea of taking the construction access off Locust Grove. We would develop a full construction entrance, and I think that that's a great idea. And then I'd reiterate the comment that if traffic is the real concern with wanting to, a reduction in lots, there's likely to be very little reduction going to 25 large family-style homes versus the 50 type homes that we are proposing. And the difference between 45 of the homes that we are proposing and 50 of the homes we are proposing is a very negligible difference in traffic, but it kills our development if we go to 45 homes. That's all I have.
Thank you. Council, any questions or comments at this time?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
Councilman Bro asked if you would be willing to speak about the average number of bedrooms and the expected buyer demo for this development.
The average number, it will be a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 15 to 2,100 square foot home. And obviously, we can't dictate who buys our homes, but in these developments in the past, it has been downsizing retiree couples, single professionals, many of them women for some reason, I'm not sure why, and occasionally young professional couples.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
follow up on that. Kind of what's the price point that would be offering these for sale?
These will be in the $400,000 to $450,000 range, assuming that things stay on the similar trajectory that they are.
Thank you.
So I know it's a very minor thing. I've been fixated on my head. Trash day. 10 homes on a cul-de-sac. I'm really kind of curious to know, based upon our own standards, how's that going to work?
If you look at this lot here, it is going to have to be a community effort. This lot takes access off of this, whoops, is it upside down again? These lots are side turned and they take access off of this common drive. So this, more than 130 feet of sidewalk on both sides, it will be full.
So that's what I assume. And really for both cul-de-sacs, would it make sense to have these signed no parking?
Yes. No parking in the cul-de-sacs, you're saying?
In the cul-de-sacs
Correct.
as at least a starting point because otherwise, in theory, it would, I don't know if the fire department's looking like they want to make a comment to that comment, but.
Right.
Yeah, Mayor, the cul-de-sac size is the minimum size, so it will have to be signed, no parking fire lane.
I believe that's already part of the, It is a requirement, I think.
And what about the other cul-de-sac, three-quarter cul-de-sac on the other side, which has similar issues because it's even less?
I do believe that they are both required no parking and to be signed.
Okay. All right. Who was from the sky?
Craig, I think.
Is that Treg?
That was, Mr. Mayor, yeah.
Councilman Byrd.
I have a question. I would like to get the fire department's opinion on what that cul-de-sac looks like. If they're in favor, if they're going to be able to maneuver their fire trucks in there, so on and so forth.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Burnt, yes. So being that it is a 48-foot radius cul-de-sac, that is the minimum that's required in the fire code. So as long as it is signed no parking fire lane as required in the fire code, we can make that cul-de-sac. Any smaller than we wouldn't be able to without three-point turning out of it. I know during our pre-app meetings, when we have these common driveways like this, we always discuss with the developers, you need to come up with something for trash day and recycling day because it's going to get really busy and you can't put them in the street. So, we've always recommended, a pad or something. Caleb Hood was big on that one, putting some spot somewhere that the trash cans can be set. So for us, as long as it's signed no parking and we can enforce it, then we're good to go.
Thank you, Chief.
Are there any other questions for the applicant?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Pro.
can you hear me okay?
Yep, hear you great.
Okay, so I actually have a question for staff, but I wanted to ask it prior to closing the public hearing in case the applicant has any comments. I read over the information regarding the changing the lot to 45 instead of 50 or reducing them by 5. And I read over everything a couple of times because it wasn't clear to me. In the staff report that was most recently published, staff had made a correction and lined out information regarding the plat requirements. Made a correction effective, I believe, March 11th, showing that the plat would now have 45 buildable lots. And so I wasn't sure why staff had made that change to the staff report if the applicant wasn't in agreement to it or had not expressed their agreement during the Planning and Zoning Commission. So if we could get clarification on that so that we're not approving the staff report with that change, in an unintended way.
Sonia?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Pro, Councilman, the commission recommended that they lose that number of lots. Therefore, it's reflected in the conditions of approval that way. If council decides not to require that, then council will need to change that condition back.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify that.
Are there any other questions?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
I want to make sure I understood Chief Bongiorno's discussion on the fire trucks during trash day. Will the fire trucks be able to access that with, certainly you can knock them out of the way, but that's not preferred. Our fire trucks are very expensive, but is that truly on trash day will make it exceedingly difficult for an engine to be going through there?
The potential is there, yes. Because I know our city code now says that you put the trash carts in the roadway, and being that it's a minimum size cul-de-sac, there could be a challenge with like the ladder truck, or each of our fire engines has a little different wheelbase, making that corner for sure. Worst case scenario, they'd have to 3-point out of it, which we don't like backing apparatus because that's when typically accidents happen. And so that's why we try and get these cul-de-sacs at least 96 feet so we could make that corner.
Okay. Thank you, Chief.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Neri.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Maybe to add to that point, we do have in our ordinance that Republic Services can direct where the trash cans go. So in a tight situation like that, they can direct them onto the sidewalk. So they don't have to be in the street. So there is an out in our ordinance that would allow it to be directed to the sidewalk to allow that access for fire.
Thank you, Mr. Neri. Are there any other questions? Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Kavanaugh.
maybe to get the conversation started. I think the applicant began by saying infill is hard, and infill always brings its challenges with it. I really want to applaud you guys, though, for bringing a creative project. Again, no question about the quality and the craftsmanship that comes from your projects. I think you mentioned single female professionals own this. I know 2 single female professionals that own houses in your properties and love them. So I think this is a great piece of infill. To me, the sticking point, the sticky wicket is there's just too many lots there. I'm supportive of the recommendation by planning and zoning. I recognize that sometimes, again, you don't always know what's around the corner in terms of what the next development can be. If it's not this, what's next? But I am sensitive to the feedback from the public about this, which is why I wish we had the chance to be able to hear from them and to give you guys the opportunity to respond. So in light of that, again, I think there's too many there. I'd be supportive of this project as recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
in that vein, Councilman Roundtree, Tyler Roundtree had a good word he used, and it was conundrum. And because to the applicant's point, 5 lots in terms of impact to traffic is not that big of a deal. However, there are real issues here, just the actual function of trash day and where things go, and if people are stopping by to pick things up, there is that. Does that, changing the number of lots, allow us to figure out a way to make that work? The other conundrum is the fact that if the applicant goes, we don't know the financials, if they say that they can't make it work, that becomes back on the property, someone picks it up, and we may not have the quality that's there. And it is quality product, and that's something that you like seeing in our community. And I know neighbors want homes that are good valued homes next to them. And that is the conundrum. If you knock down the number of lots, are you greatly reducing the traffic enough that makes it worthwhile? Or is it a tipping point that takes us to a different type of product that results in other issues that would have repercussions for the neighbors? That's the conundrum.
Mr. Mayor, this is Liz.
Councilwoman
Hear me?
Schrader. Yep.
I'm grappling with similar issues in terms of, I have a letter from West Ada urging denial of this application. I think I can be convinced that real creativity for an infill piece of property is of value to the city. I share the same concerns I've heard by my fellow council members, though, about just the function of this, how it works on trash day. I've seen a lot of neighbor concerns about traffic, and at the end of the day, I don't think it's our role to make a project pencil. And so, I'm kind of floating between denying the application because of overcrowding issues to perhaps, getting on board with reducing the buildable lots. I think I can wrap my head around that just based on the quality of the product. If we use the West Ada's formula and kind of divide that equally, that's about 12 additional students per school. We know Oahe will bring some capacity. Prospect is not as overcrowded as some of the other schools. However, it is overcrowded. I think I can be convinced on this one just based on the infill aspect of it, but I do agree that the amount of lots needs to be reduced to make it workable. And I don't think it's our role to make the project pencil. I think it's our role to try to strike a balance that is functional for the neighborhood. So that's kind of where I'm sitting right now.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Perot.
I have a question for Councilwoman Schrader. I don't know why the applicant elected not to make this a 55-plus community. But if that were the case, Councilwoman Schrader, would you be more inclined to be in agreement? Because then that, to some extent, takes the school district element out of it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Burnt, do you have any comments you'd like to make at this point in time?
I can make a couple. Thank you, Mayor Simison. I'm in agreement with the density. First and foremost, I got to applaud the applicant for doing his or her best to try to make this application work and make it feasible within, an infill type project. There are a lot of good things to it. I love the design of the homes. I love the space and the transition from this project to other to the north and the south. I believe that the applicant did as good of a job as he or she could have done to make this work. It just goes back to the density issue of it. I just think that east portion of the project there's too much. There's too many homes there, and I just foresee in the future with signs and no signs or issues. First and foremost is the health and safety of our community, and I foresee problems on the east end when it comes to service, whether it be through our services or through Republic. So unless the applicant is willing to make the project less dense, I probably wouldn't be in favor of it right now.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
a question for the applicant, if you wouldn't mind. As I look at these things, your mind's always going through, how do we fix it? How do we make it work? How do we, good suggestion, can we keep Locust Grove open for construction, for those types of things? How do we find a way to make the trash work? Always trying to find the yes in things, because, you have good ideas, good plans, and you have to sometimes give and take a little bit. I know time is money, but would it be possible to delay this to April 7th? We don't have a meeting next week, just to see if there's a way we could resolve the trash issues and any other density issues that might help in this project?
Councilman Hoagland, can I propose that we would be willing to build a pad on the corner of lots 20 and 31, the two lots that are adjacent to the cul-de-sac, at the opening of the cul-de-sac? We would have 30 by whatever, 10 feet, where it would be out of the sidewalk. And if that would help ease that, we would be willing to do that. I'm not sure if that's the biggest concern here, but if it is, that's something that we would be willing to do.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
I think, Dean, yes, that would be one thing to help take care of that problem in those cul-de-sacs. If we're looking at some pads like that, it would be good to see, because of the fire engines making that turn and responding to typically medical emergencies as opposed to fires. But there might be other issues that you consider if you delay and taking a look at this subdivision.
Okay, and
Mayor.
Oh, go ahead.
Council Administrator?
I apologize. I wasn't able to hear the applicant's proposal, whether he wanted to change the use of the property to put in a commercial pad or what the proposal was. I agree with Councilman Hoagland's suggestion. If the applicant wants to delay, perhaps to rework this, that might make sense.
The proposal was to put in pads on a couple of the parcels for trash pickup as part of it. They did not yet answer the delay. Just speaking for myself, and I don't have a vote on this issue, you at least answered my question on traffic once we realized that there was no parking allowed in the cul-de-sac. And with Republic's ability to direct where it should be placed. So I'm off that issue, but if there's still maybe others that are wanting that, but I don't have a vote, so I'll let you answer the second question.
we would prefer not to delay, but we would be, I just spoke with Todd before I came up here, we would be willing to reduce 2 lots. If that helps satisfy that, we can still pencil at the 48 number. Further than that, we cannot agree to. And obviously, it's your decision if we delay this or not. We prefer not to.
Council, do I have any questions or motions?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Hoagland.
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we close the public hearing on H 2019-0135.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Is there any comment on the motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, maybe just a discussion before a motion's made. If I'm hearing...
Councilman Kavanagh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I'm hearing things correctly, I think we've got 3 paths that we can explore. Maybe a motion to approve it, the recommendations of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Sounds like the applicant won't be supportive of that. We could continue it for a few weeks to allow the applicant to rework the application. Also sounds like they're not supportive of that. So then the third would be to, I guess, deny it. Or I guess a fourth option is to approve it, less 2 lots. So I guess we have four pathways. I would hate to deny a project like this. I really would. But I feel still that I appreciate the offer of 2 lots. To me, that doesn't make the impact, I think, in some of the concerns that we've heard. 4 or 5 to me seem to make the most sense, just when you look at the map of where I think you can make some impacts, both on the traffic and on the trash, fire issues. So I'm one that's not supportive of a motion to approve that only reduces 2 lots. I don't want to deny it. So for me, I'm in a place where I would be then supporting the application as presented by the Planning and Zoning Commission, for what it's worth.
Mr. Mayor, this is Liz.
Councilwoman Schrader.
I am always trying to get to a yes, and I think that Mr. Kavanagh's proposal is the only yes that I can get to. I'm really struggling with the density in this location, given the traffic. I'm really struggling with the additional students and the burden on the schools. I think a reduction in lots is the only way that I could be supportive, and I would like to try to be supportive of this project because it is infill and because I do think it is high quality and creative. But I'm with Councilman Kavanagh. I can only support this, I think, with the reduction in the buildable lots as per planning and zoning.
Council, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Kavanagh.
Not seeing anybody else wanting to speak out or message me, so I'll give this a shot and we'll see where it goes. Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve item 7B, Almond Subdivision H-2019-0135 as presented, including staff, applicant, public testimony, recognizing the recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission 9A2C to reduce the number of buildable lots by 5 to no more than 45, and to have no more than 6 lots off the cul-de-sac on the eastern portion of the subdivision.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there discussion on the motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
I want to throw this out there. I don't know if this would even apply if they walk away from the project, but that construction move forward in a manner that allows use of the existing driveway off of Locust Grove for as long as possible to keep construction traffic off of existing streets, if we could add that in there somehow.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Councilmember Hogan, 100%, yes, that would, I guess I made the false mistake of assuming that was kind of referenced and discussed. That was what the applicant wanted, it sounded like we were in support of, so I'm supportive of that as well.
Thank you.
Does the second agree?
Yes.
Second agrees, okay. Is there any further discussion on the motion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cavanagh,
Aye.
Perot,
Aye.
Strader,
Aye.
Hoagland,
No.
Burnt,
Aye.
Ayes have it. Motion is agreed to. Next item is item 7C, public hearing for Fraser Council Review, H 2020-0011. And I'll turn this over to,
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Hood is on his way.
okay, let's, turn this over to Mr. Hood.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Apologize, I thought we were going to take a quick recess there in between projects, so there aren't too many of us, but if you can give me just a minute, I'm going to pull up a vicinity map and present to you this application. So on January 2nd, 2020, I approved an accessory use permit for a family daycare with 6 or fewer children to operate out of a single-family home located at 5343 North Maplestone Avenue. That's in Jump Creek subdivision. So here's the intersection of Black Cat and McMillan. This is Jump Creek subdivision. The home is approximately here. They're so new, Google Earth doesn't show it. It's actually the second lot north of this micropath lot. Is where the in-home daycare was proposed and approved by staff for Elizabeth Sonjay. A notice of approval was then provided to the applicant as well as 7 property owners that were within 100 feet. One of those was the HOA. Again, there's HOA property within 100 feet as well. Later in January, we did receive a council review, that's also known as an appeal, of my decision from Mr. Nick Frazier. His basis for appeal is that, 1, no neighborhood meeting was held, so a process concern there, and that he doesn't believe that they can comply with the parking requirements for a family daycare. His narrative goes on to say that there's 3 cars already parked in the driveway. He did provide some photos as well in his application. Goes on to state some noise and proximity concerns with having a daycare in relative close proximity again to his residence. Traffic, density. I assume that he's here, so I'll let him kind of speak and a little bit more on his narrative and why we're here this evening. But in the R8 zone, the city code does allow an in-home daycare with that administrative approval. We have also received 2 other forms of public testimony on this, one from a Raymond and
Mr. Mayor?
Janice.
Yes? Councilman
I
Burnt?
apologize. We're not able to hear Caleb very well. He's going in and out. So if he could just speak directly into the mic, that would be appreciated.
Will do.
Do you want me to start over? No. Okay, sorry about that. So we have received 2 forms of notice, public testimony as well after we sent notice out to the neighbors of the appeal from Raymond and Janice Borchard. Just to summarize their concerns, they say that the daycare is not compatible with a single-family subdivision. They also have parking concerns, that there's already 3 vehicles regularly on site. They also expressed some concerns about emergency services being able to access the front door because of those homes parked in the driveway. Construction traffic, again, the subdivision's under construction now, so there's concerns about children. The basketball hoop that's in front. We do have, just as an aside, we do have standards for that. So outdoor play areas for family daycares, it does prohibit those in the front yard, so that basketball hoop would not be allowed. And then some procedural concerns that were also brought up by Sandy Cameron, who's supporting the appellant. Again, traffic and parking on-street concerns and turnaround concerns in this new subdivision. Again, the appellant as well as Sandy Cameron also stated that that no neighborhood meeting was held on the 21st of November as the applicant put in their application submittal to the city. Our city code does require that an applicant for a family daycare hold a neighborhood meeting, or at least offer to have a neighborhood meeting with all property owners within 100 feet of the exterior boundaries of the subject property. We did receive that from the applicant, that they did offer to hold a neighborhood meeting at their home. There are some notes in there that no one attended, but they did talk to a couple of their neighbors nearby.
Mr. Mayor?
I'm eating the microphone.
Councilman Burnt?
Would it be okay if Caleb went to the mic where in the front? It seems like we're hearing much better there than where he's at currently.
You bet.
I'm done with my presentation unless you want me to come forward.
Council, any questions for Caleb that maybe, or things that you'd like him to repeat that you may not have heard? Although I understand the...
Yes. Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Burnt?
Caleb, can you repeat what you said in regard to the noticing, please? And in regard, to the noticing, and also if you can repeat what the details are with the neighborhood meeting, please.
Sure, I apologize that other microphone, you couldn't hear me. So city code does require that...
Way better.
Okay. That an applicant for in-home family daycare with 6 or fewer children do invite all properties within the exterior boundary of the property, they're within 100 feet, to a neighborhood meeting to explain that their intent is to apply with the city for such application. After and if staff approves that application, the city then sends a notice to those same property owners that are within 100 feet of the property, notifying them that we have recently approved that application and that there's an appeal period. So that's what you have here is that notice was sent out by the city after the approval was granted, and then we received an appeal of that decision.
Thank you, Mr. Hood. Mayor Simonson stepped out briefly. Are there questions for Caleb?
Mr. Mayor, this is Councilwoman Perot. Can you hear me?
Yes, Councilman Perot, go ahead.
I have a question for Caleb. I noticed that the letter that the city sent out allowed for appeals prior to January 17th, but the letter that we received from the applicant came in, I believe, on January 22nd.
Yes, let me address that. So we had actually a couple of things. So we were in contact
with Mr. Frazier within the 15-day appeal period. He did provide us the information for the appeal. We informed him that there is a cost because we send the notice out and all that. So there's a cost to notice the public hearing for this meeting. We also had a question of our legal staff about posting the site. So this is one of those UDC changes that you'll be seeing forthcoming. Our code wasn't real clear, and having an appellant post on someone else's property, I could figure that the original applicant wouldn't want that in their front yard. So we had a question for our legal staff in the interim. So he got his application in within the 15-day appeal window. We had a question for legal about where do we actually put this public hearing notice of tonight's hearing. And so there's a little lag in getting the application fee as well as figuring out where to direct the appellant to put the notice of public hearing sign.
Any other questions from council for Mr. Hood?
Mr. Vice President.
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead, Councilwoman Perot. Or is that, yeah, Councilwoman?
One more question. I noticed that the address labels that are in the file for public records don't match all the addresses that are on the vicinity map. There's fewer address labels than there are on the vicinity map. So I was wondering if Caleb could address that as well.
I did not actually look into that, but I'm going to speculate. So there are, and I can verify this maybe while the appellant is giving testimony, but if there are multiple properties owned by the same individual, we will only send one notice. So I imagine that the development company owns one or two or three of those lots, so we only send them one notice, or the HOA owns one or two or three parcels, and so we only send them one notice. I can verify that. I saw that there were only 5, 6, 7 notices that went out, but there are on the map more properties highlighted than that, but I didn't look any further than that. Maybe the city clerk could even verify that, but I imagine that's what happened.
Councilman Kavanagh, question?
Caleb, this is the first time I remember one of these things kind of happening. So help me understand the process. You as the director approve after the application, and then if the public if they disagree, they're not in support, then they have to file the appeal and then pay to then communicate that back out to the public. Am I tracking right?
You've summarized that accurately, yes.
Mr. Vice President. Caleb, what's the cost that we charge somebody to do something like that?
It's in the neighborhood of $600 or $700 to appeal city council review of an application. I don't remember exactly. I don't have the fee schedule in front of me right now. There may be a receipt on here. Wow. It's somewhere in that neighborhood.
It's a lot of money. A lot of money. Okay.
The appellant could probably know. He wrote the check here in January, so sorry, I do not know that off the top of my head, but it's in that ballpark.
Unless there are further questions, we'll call the applicant up to provide testimony. And as per record, state your name and address for the record, and go ahead and tell us your story.
All right. Thank you very much for letting me be here. My name is Nick Frazier. I live at 5337 North Maplestone Avenue here in Meridian. So some good questions on process. So let me just start by saying what this process has been for me. So I receive a letter in the mail saying your directly neighbor, has been approved to run a daycare business. And if you disagree, like if you don't want to live next to a daycare, then write us a letter and say why. And so I did that. And then they said, hey, this is great, we got your letter, now send us $700. Also, here's some other forms you need to do, and you need to post a 4x4 sign in your front yard, which is about 12 feet wide, and have it there for 2 weeks. Also, you need to get that notarized that you are posting that sign. So I will say that this process has been seemingly a little backwards. It felt like the burden should be more on the person that wants to run a childcare business, that they meet all requirements other than any neighbors. But that being said, I will leave that to the council for another time. So I will bring up my phone because I do have some notes on the Unified Code, so please forgive me. So I do live right next door. These are fairly small lots, so there is essentially 15 feet between me and the neighbor. Essentially 8 feet between my house and their yard. But largely the issue is they don't meet a lot of the standards to my understanding of them. So there are requirements for having this daycare facility. They're required to have on-site vehicle pickup, parking, and turnaround areas. They don't have those. They're required to have so much non-on-street parking, which again, they don't have. They didn't have this meeting, and I guess it's just okay for them to, obviously they didn't, because if they did, we would have, had this discussion way before now. In addition, my lot is right next to theirs. There is no fence between, our front yards. So if a child comes into my yard and hurts themselves, I am liable for any physical damage to that child. So I am very concerned about my liability, my legal liability, having children, and so many children running around in the front yard. And then also there's just a concept of, which I learned today, it's quiet enjoyment, that a person has the right to quiet enjoyment of their home. And so if I'm living 8 feet of a daycare, I just don't think that I'm going to be able to have that. And that's a pretty big concern of mine, and that's why I would spend the money that that Councilman Kavanagh recognized. Thank you. Any questions are for me, or?
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Appreciate it. Questions, council?
Mr. Vice President Liz Strader has questions.
Councilwoman Strader, go ahead.
I actually have two questions. Mr. Frazier, thank you for coming before us. My first question is, give me a sense for your total lot size, relatively speaking, and maybe your neighbors as well, just so I can get a feel for, the size of, I guess, the potential daycare facility next to you and how close that is. And then, do you have a fence between your backyards? My second question, and oops, I have a third question. I'll just get it out while people can hear me. So I'm on the phone. Have you tried to sit down with your neighbor directly to talk about your concerns?
Okay, so as the lot size, I think my lot is actually one of the bigger lots, so I think my lot is about like 70 feet by 100 feet. I think their lot is quite a bit smaller than that. But I guess I would say I could be wrong on some of that. There is a fence. I did have a fence put in around my backyard some months ago. So we do have a fence, and I have not spoken to the neighbor.
Any other questions for the appellant? All right. Thank you, Nick. We'll be hearing back from you a little bit later. And would you like to come up and speak? And state your name and address for the record, please. And talk directly into the mic.
Mayor Simison and the council and other distinguished individuals, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Renee, spelled R-A-N-A-Y-E, last name Marsh, M-A-R-S-H. I am here in support of Nick. I only met him today, but I've seen the sign in his yard every day as I pass to go to my mailbox. I walk my dog and I go by the front of his house and the individual requesting the daycare. And I can't go the other way very well because of all the construction going on. So I do walk by these people, and everything that's been said is correct. They have 3 cars in their driveway at all times. I can't say at all times, that's a generalization, but pretty much all the time they have 3 cars there. And they have a basketball standard, which is temporary, which has been mentioned. And according to certain guidelines by the development right now, that is not allowed, but it has not been addressed, nor has it been moved. I can't say that I didn't receive notice because I didn't live there when this was all taking place. I've been in my home for about 3 weeks. But my backyard looks directly across into those, the backyard of those who are applying for the daycare. And Mr. Frazier is correct. He has one of the larger size, but it's still, all of our development have very small, close lots. And so everything that he said, I stand behind him 100%. I agree that he's done everything that he can, in my opinion, to make this work. He has not been out canvassing the neighborhood. I found it by Sandy Cameron that wrote one of the notes. I found out that this was going on. And when I did, I tried to send you an email, but I can't because I have no internet yet. It's not working. So I came tonight to stand beside Nick and say, please address his concern appropriately because I feel it's a very valid concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Marsh. Any questions for her? Is the original applicant, not to this case, but for the daycare, Mrs. Song, present? Mr. Hood, any message from Elizabeth Song on her, who submitted the documentation and the request for the daycare? Do we know why she's not here?
No, Mr. Vice Chairman, I have not heard from the original applicant.
Thank you. So,
Mr. Vice President.
Yes, Chief Mongiorno.
While we were sitting here, I pulled up the preliminary plat and the plat for Jump Creek. I know one of the councilwomen, I'm not sure which one, had a question about the lot size, and it looks like those lots are 70 by 100, according to the preliminary plat.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that clarification.
Sure. Mr. Vice President.
Councilman Kavanagh.
So I kind of started, this is unique for us. We rarely have something like this. And it's even more unique that the original, I guess, applicant for a daycare isn't here to speak to, or my questions about, did a neighborhood meeting occur, did it not? We've received a couple pieces of correspondence that says that it's not. They're not here to say it did, and here's the people who are here, which makes it tough to say, yep, this person or that person. So I don't know, I guess, Mr. Neri, help me understand what our action is here tonight is to either uphold the appellant's request, which would be to deny the approval of the director. Am I understanding that correct?
Mr. Vice President, members of council, Councilman Carver. Yes, so your actions tonight are either to approve the appellant's request, as you just stated, or to deny it. If the one of the basis, obviously, that I've heard is the noticing of a neighborhood meeting. It is in code. It is specific in code in relation to the neighborhood meeting. It has to be noticed within 100 feet. You have a person who lives adjacent in the adjacent property who stated that he never received any notice. I agree with Mr. Hood. There's always been an issue about these smaller applications and signage, and we're trying to resolve that in some rewrites. So whether or not she met a signage requirement, I can't tell you that she didn't, but if she didn't have a neighborhood meeting, then technically her application should not have been accepted. Or if she did, and I'll just say inadvertently told us she tried to and no one was interested, that's still not the requirement. The requirement is you have to show the neighborhood meeting was offered and nobody came. And usually you'll see a sign-up sheet, something like that, date, time, that kind of stuff. So you would see that. I would add for the record, maybe also just for some education for the public, because I'm probably the expert here on daycares. I mean, they are intended for residential neighborhoods. So, I mean, it is for these types of neighborhoods that we will allow them for that. We don't consider them to be commercial properties, and we don't consider them to be a commercial business. We make it very, very low key on how they can be advertised and signed and all that. So that issue, I just wanted to educate that was obviously a concern of neighbors, but definitely it is a fatal flaw if the neighborhood meeting wasn't held.
Mr. Hoagland, a follow-up question maybe to Mr. Hood.
Councilman Kavanagh.
Caleb, if a neighborhood meeting did occur and the neighbor said, yeah, we don't want this in our neighborhood, what happens at that point? I mean, is the request to have it but not to take the feedback? Sorry, you're getting your steps in tonight. I apologize.
Mr. Hood.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Councilman Kavanagh. Yeah, the requirement is to just invite those within 100 feet. If they attend or don't attend, if let's say they attend in your scenario, right, and they don't like the idea of that daycare, it doesn't mean that you can't still then apply and even receive approval for that. Kind of to Mr. Neri's point, these are allowed as an outright use, and there was a question I think earlier by Councilman Strader. Be a good neighbor though, go and talk with your neighbor, see if they have any concerns about you opening this quasi-business, although we don't consider it a commercial business. It's a neighborhood service type of thing, right? It's this hybrid. And I can't tell you how often that happens. Hey, I maybe want to open a daycare. My neighbors don't like it. I'm stepping down. Or I don't care. I'm not going to be a bad neighbor. I'm going to press forward with this, and you can appeal it if you like. But that's the process. We are almost requiring them to try to be good neighbors and at least talk before applying. That's what our code does.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Kavanagh.
Mr. Hoagland, I think that answers my questions for Mr. Hood. A follow-up question maybe then back to Mr. Neri. I was surprised, even though maybe I shouldn't be, that the cost to appeal this decision was, to me, I think, fairly high. And I recognize that's to cover the cost of the city and the services. If the council wanted to entertain refunding those fees to the appellant, is that an option that we're able to explore, and under what grounds could we do that?
So, Mr. Vice President, members of council, Councilmember Kavanagh, it's certainly within your purview. I generally discourage those for simply the reason that they're too high. Almost everyone will say every one of our fees are too high, no matter what they are. So that's probably not a fair basis, because you would then have to apply that in all cases. Sure. These are appeals of all types from the either staff or planning and zoning, and they have various fees for the types of approvals. So I'd be hesitant if it was simply just for the cost. If, for example, you determine that it has not been proved that the neighborhood meeting was held, therefore the application was flawed in the application process, then that's a fatal flaw on the applicant, and therefore refunding the fees for the appeal would be more consistent with other situations, very rare as they are, where we refund fees.
Mr. Hoagland, a follow-up if I may.
Councilman Kavanagh.
Mr. Neri, then, if that was the basis that the council found, should that be a separate motion, or could that be included in the motion to uphold the appellant's request?
Mr. Neri.
Thank you. Mr. Vice President, members of the council, Councilmember Kavanagh. I think to be cleaner, I would prefer that it be two separate motions and two separate votes on that issue. It certainly can be, again, the basis of the one decision and therefore the basis of the second. But I think it would be cleaner for the record if we had two.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Neri. Thank you, Mr. Hoagland.
Any other questions from council?
Mr. Vice President.
Councilwoman Perot.
Is the applicant still available to answer questions?
Yes, Mr. Frazier is here. Mr. Frazier?
Or the appellant, excuse me.
Could you repeat that, Councilwoman Perot?
I meant the appellant, not the applicant. Mr. Frazier, would it make any difference if the neighbor had 6 of their own children versus the daycare? Tell me, in your opinion, are the concerns primarily that people will be coming and going and dropping their children off, and there being parking? Or, I mean, if the neighbor happened to have 6 of their own children, I'm not sure that the noise would be different in the backyard, or that there'd be more or less concerns regarding liability in your front yard. Can you share some thoughts for me on that?
Yes, Councilwoman. So you are correct. I think that is I think legally is the concern is the parking. And I'll say, like, yeah, if they had 6 children of their own, that's life. You know, I would have the same situation, but, you know, that's not the situation. They don't have 6 children. So they do have children being dropped off, and you know, these people are parking, you know, up and down along the street, and they're driving around the block. So I guess there's the scenario, yeah, you could argue, like, yeah, if they did have 6 children, I would just have to just accept that. I mean, that's life.
Mr. Frazier, I have a quick question. It's kind of an awkward question because I'd rather be asking the original applicant to answer this. Do you know how many children they have?
I don't.
Okay. Just an odd question because they talked about no more than 6, including her own. So I'm making an assumption, oh, they've already got kids, but I didn't know. So, yeah, like I said, that's awkward because you can't speak for her, but it's an unusual situation, as you can imagine. So,
yes, I totally understand, Councilman.
Any other questions from council? Mr. Frazier, thank you. Would you like to?
Liz.
Councilwoman Strader, go ahead.
I apologize. It's not a question for the appellant. It's a question for staff. I just want to circle back. If we made an attempt to contact the original potential daycare owner about the public hearing and that we were having this meeting, just to confirm that.
Caleb, go ahead.
Mr. Vice President, Councilwoman Strader, hopefully you can hear me. Yes, it's my understanding that Joe Dodson in my office, who prepared the memo for this evening, did contact Ms. Sanjay or someone else that was representing the applicant and made them aware, shared the staff memo, and they were aware at least of the hearing this evening, so I don't know where they're at, though. I did not personally talk to them.
Councilwoman Strader, any follow-up?
No, I guess my only follow-up, maybe it's not a question, it's just more of a comment. I mean, certainly we are in unusual times with people not wanting to be in a public meeting, and I'm sure later we're going to talk about how we're conducting our future meetings and how people can access them. It does make me a little bit nervous, just making sure we really felt like we did reach out and gave them the opportunity to join on the telephone specifically. I just want to check that the teleconferencing option to dial into the meeting was made as an option to the potential daycare owner.
Thank you, Councilwoman Strader. Any other questions or comments from council? I'm going to have Mr. Frazier, if you want to wrap up.
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to make maybe a comment and a question. So I will say that there has been a 4x4 foot sign in my front yard for the past 10 days that stated when the meeting was going to be. So I think that the Ms. Angie had plenty of notice about the meeting. I don't mean to sound bitter. And if at all possible, I'd like to ask a question to Mr. Hood, I believe your name is. Is there a provision to, I guess, verify that Ms. Sanji meets the requirements as far as parking and those things? Because I think if they meet those requirements, like if the planning goes out there and verifies that, yes, all these requirements are met, then I don't have any standing. And at the end of the day, I just want rules to be followed. I followed all the rules to be here, and I just want that other people follow the rules. And I just felt like in this circumstance, rules weren't being followed.
Mr. Frazier, thank you for that question. I would ask Mr. Hood to come up and respond to the questions about the parking and the process.
Mr. Hoagland?
Yeah, no, it's a good.
One second, sorry. Before Caleb starts to talk about did Ms. Sanji get notified, she actually also did get sent a postcard to her address about this hearing. So aside from the sign, she did receive the legal notice we send out to neighbors.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Appreciate that update. Mr. Hood.
So it's a good question, and yes, we do verify. Some of the standards that you'll find in code, though, are we put you on notice that you will have to comply. So if you violate later, we have code enforcement officers that will go out and send you a letter saying, hey, remember we gave you approval. So some of those things like parking, we look at up front. So in this case, we look at the size of the home, what area is going to be used for the daycare, and verify that, at least on paper. Now, how they're using that, if their garage is full of stuff and not cars, we don't do that type of investigation, but we look at the floor plan, and we can see that in a 4-bedroom home, you have 4 car parks plus an extra 2, 6 cars, so 3 in pads out front, and then a 3-car garage. So by code, you comply with the additional requirements for a daycare. Now, how they're used, that is something that we don't as planning look at. But we do review a site plan. We do ensure that the fencing is put up to, in this case, they hadn't sodded their backyard, and they had noticed that in their application, hey, when this gets sodded, we'll have kids back there, but not until. But looking at the fence and require a solid, non-scalable fence to be installed. So some of it's done, again, to verify that out the gate, some of those base standards are complied with, and then ongoing conditions will need to be complied with. And if there's a concern after approval, then again, we have a code enforcement arm of the city that can go out and do an investigation and send a letter as appropriate and deal with the neighbors that way if there are concerns that way. Where I thought that question was going to go initially is the verification of the neighborhood meeting. And for that, and there are a couple of things in here, and I don't know if it happened or not. We only go off of what is submitted in the application, but nothing in that led us to believe that didn't happen. She stated in there that she held it on 11/21 and no one showed up, and that she talked to a couple of close friends or something like that about it, and they didn't have any concerns. So we do require a sign-in sheet to be had at that meeting, and she turned that in and just handwritten on there. No one came. Now, did she send out the notice to everyone within her? I don't know. Some of that's a little bit the honor system. We don't require that to be sent by certified mail. So there is a little bit of, we trust people will notice their neighbors.
Thank you, Mr. Hood. We do that for other developments, and I know we have to. Caleb, if you want to wait, I think Councilman Kavanagh has a question. Councilman.
Mr. Hoagland, thank you. Just trying to save you the trip. Caleb, the original applicant, Ms. Sanji, there's nothing that prevents her from resubmitting at a later point in time, correct?
It's a good question. I know in a section of our code, we do have, if something's denied, you have to make substantial changes to something before you can resubmit it, or wait 12 months. In this case, where there was an original approval, and I don't know what your decision's going to be tonight, we'd have to look at that, see if that section of code applies in this case. But typically for a development application, you either have to make substantive changes as determined by the director or wait a year to reapply for essentially the same application.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Caleb. Any other questions, council members?
Mr. Hoagland.
Councilman Kavanagh.
Unless no one else has anything they want to say, I move that we close the public hearing on item 7C, Fraser Council Review, H-2020-0011.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion, a second, to close the public hearing on H 2020-0011. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it, motion carries.
Mr.
Councilman
Hoagland,
Kavanagh.
I guess I'm going to intend to make 2 motions here. My first will be that we grant the appellate review of H-2020-0011 and find in favor of the appellant.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to uphold the appellant's appeal of the approval of the director's approval of accessory use of daycare. Any questions or discussion of the motion?
Mr. Hoagland.
Mr. Vice President.
Councilman Byrne?
Thank you. I wish that the daycare owner was here. I would really like to ask questions. I'm actually quite surprised. I hope everything's okay. I hope that they didn't have an emergency this evening that prevented them from being here. I hope that all is well in their household, especially during these trying times. If it were me, I still would have reached out or had someone else reach out. Sounds like that she's had plenty of opportunities to know that this meeting was tonight, that we would be discussing this. Because she's not here and because she's not able to provide the information or at least answer questions that we have, I will be in favor of Mr. Cavanag's motion.
Thank you, Councilman Byrne. Any other comments, questions? Hearing none.
Mr. Hoagland, it's Liz.
Councilwoman Strader, go ahead.
Yeah, I would echo the same comments and just say, I have an expectation. If you want to run a daycare business, you should be a good neighbor and reach out to your neighbor and check if they have any concerns and, sit down and work those out. And I'm disappointed that didn't happen, and that's part of why I support Mr. Frazier's appeal, basically, of this daycare.
Thank you. Any other comments? Hearing none, we'll have the city clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Cavanagh?
Aye.
Perot?
Aye.
Strader?
Aye.
Hoagland?
Aye.
Burnt?
Aye.
All ayes, motion carries. Councilman Cavanagh.
Mr. Hoagland, because I find there's enough compelling information to at least demonstrate that it's very unlikely that a neighborhood meeting occurred, or if one occurred that no one was invited to, I would move that we would refund the appellant's fees. According to the clerk, it's a dollar amount of $692 to be refunded back to the appellant.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to refund the fees for this appeal. Is there comments, discussion on this?
Mr. Hoagland.
Councilman Cavanagh.
I'll just speak to it, and it's two-part. Mr. Neri did a great job. We don't do this just because the fees are too high. That's a conversation, I think, for another day, and one I hope maybe that we could have a conversation about at a future time. I worry sometimes that fee would prevent other people from being able to engage in the process around this. But in light of the information around specifically the neighborhood meeting, which is, again, disappointing that we can't find the reason about that tonight, I think that's a satisfactory grounds to be able to refund that back for the appellant.
Thank you, Councilman Cavanagh. Any other questions or comments from council?
Mr. Vice President?
Mr. Vice President?
Councilman Byrne, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Just a quick question to Bill, just to make sure that on legal grounds we're okay.
Mr. Vice President, members of the council, Councilmember Byrne, I'm very comfortable with the fact that if the basis of the motion, which is what I heard, is that the applicant failed to follow our process and we have no evidence to show that it was complied with, that's on the applicant, and I have no concern with it, with a refund for that purpose.
Thank you, Mr. Neri.
Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments before we vote? Hearing none, Mr. City Clerk, please call roll.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Cavanagh?
Aye.
Perot?
Aye.
Strader,
Aye.
Hoagland,
Aye.
Burnt.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Frazier.
You both.
Thank you, Ms. Marsh, for coming. Appreciate it. We're typically done. Go ahead, come on up. You can, we'll let you, I guess, have the last word.
The mayor stepped out.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Forgive my,
It's all
lack
right.
of decorum. I just wanted to say, even if you didn't find it in my favor, this has been a very pleasant experience for me. I mean, the $700 in the process, not so much, but being here tonight and, interacting with my, city government, like I said, even if it didn't go in my way, thank you very much, especially you, Councilman Kavanagh, but as well as on the phone, some very smart questions. So forgive, I'm not trying to brown nose, I just want to say thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
engaging
Mr.
the
Frazier.
process.
We appreciate that and for your involvement and for taking the time to do it. That's, we're here to serve and try to make the right decisions that we can. And just glad we could work it out on this one. So thank you. We do have item 7D on the we had added to the agenda about future presentations and applications. And I think Councilman Kavanagh, if you want to kick us off on that and kind of talk about, since we are in unusual times and different situations and how we go about the process and meetings. So I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Councilmember Hoagland, and I know the mayor had to step out, but I feel real confident he'll watch this meeting at this part as well. Councilmember Hoagland, to your point, these are in uncertain times, and a week ago we implemented social distancing in our council, and now we've got council members that are calling in from home, and every day things are changing, and I grow more and more concerned about our public's inability to feel like that they can come and participate in this process. And I'm not sure what solutions we have explored or can explore or are willing to explore to open the doors for better public engagement, whether from the comforts of their own home, the parking lot, a separate room. I don't know. But I know that I've had the opportunity this week to talk to members of the public, folks who we see in this chamber on a regular basis, and unequivocally, all of them said, delay this stuff as long as you can. And I think the mayor and his staff have done a great job of pulling out all the things that we are not legally required to hear. What I don't know, and this is, I think, maybe a question for Mr. Neri, and I wish the mayor was here so he had the chance to chime in, is do we have an opportunity right now to place a temporary moratorium on annexations? And the reason for that is those are the ones that I see typically bring a lot of the members of the public in. And I can't believe I would owe somebody a cheeseburger to say that I'm suggesting that we place a moratorium on development. But I worry about just the disservice that we're doing to our citizens by having this barrier that we didn't create impact their ability to participate. So I guess that's my first question. Is that something that we can look to do?
So, Mr. Vice President, members of the council, Councilmember Kavanagh, possibly. The problem with it is you have to have a public hearing to do that. So from the practical standpoint, it doesn't work. And let me add something to the record. You and I had this conversation, but the only reason we're having meetings is because the public meeting law is still in effect. The governor has the ability to suspend that. He has not done that. He's only done it in relation to who can access the interior of the room. And right now, the governor has issued an order that allows cities to prohibit the public from entering the meeting room, but still requires at least one member of the body, the commission or the council, be present in the room. Everybody else can be on the phone. So I know we've had a lot of public saying, just cancel the meetings, and legally we can't. If they're noticed, we have to have the hearing. The appellant or the applicant has a right to be heard and a right for a decision. If you don't have enough information to make a decision, obviously you can continue the matter. But there's nothing in the code that allows us to continue it because we have a pandemic. Obviously, no one ever anticipated that. We are on the front end trying to slow down when they get scheduled. Because that's really the key, is if we can address them at the planning and zoning level for applications and space out or slow down or wait till information is completed and not look to put them on the agenda as quickly as we have in the past, that's an opportunity to slow the, I don't want to say slow the curve like everybody else, but to slow down the pipeline, because the way our code reads, once it's heard at planning and zoning and the final decision is made, it's 70 days to bring it here in front of the council. Again, they all require notice. And again, we're looking at alternatives. Mr. Johnson probably can help add. We tried a telephone town hall method for the public planning and zoning last week. It was very last minute because everything's last minute right now. And the intent of that was to try to see, would that work? It functioned really well. We didn't have a lot of people use it because they didn't know about it.
Right.
So if we were to use that method for future meetings, it appears to function pretty well. It's a little more staff heavy to use it, but people can call in, they can watch the meeting in their car, on their phone, or wherever. They can call in. It's pretty good. And again, Mr. Johnson knows more about it than I do. It's a little expensive, so there is a cost to come to that, like everything. But that's a solution. Again, the business of what the city does has to go on. So the paying bills, approving easements, approving development, all of your consent agenda items, we would like to continue to do, because otherwise we are slowing down everything on things that really don't have the necessity for public input. So we are trying to do that, but those are tools that might be eligible. We have a large hearing for planning and zoning with a lot of people interested in attending on April 16th. That's why we tried the telephone town hall. That might be a tool, and if the decision by the mayor and the council is to use that tool, knowing cost was going to be large to do that, we could then notify the public earlier, hopefully get a lot of people to use that method. Certainly in that particular hearing, a lot of the folks that were contacting us wanted to be physically here. As you can see in this room, social distancing is a challenge. Even in the lobby, it's a challenge. But we're finding it's a challenge everywhere. So it's not like it's just unique to us.
Thank you, Mr. Neri. Other questions, comments, council? Discussion?
Mr. Vice President, I can
Vice President?
I'm going to have Chris Johnson, City Clerk, speak first.
just to add in for everyone's benefit, we have already noticed 4 hearings for the April 2nd Planning and Zoning Commission, 1 hearing for April 16th. That's the Delano project with the heavy public input. And we have noticed 3 additional hearings for April 23rd, Planning and Zoning. So those are all already noticed to the public and in the pipeline to be in the newspaper. And then you have 4 public hearings before this body on April 7th that are land use related. And that's the furthest out we've noticed for City Council. But everything that is in the pipeline, April 2nd, 16th, and the special meeting on the 23rd, those will all start that clock, which will bring them before City Council as well. I can also address briefly the telephone town hall. We pay on a sliding scale based on the number of listeners. We also have to have additional staff on site to handle the incoming calls and to screen those. We paid $650, the city did, for the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting when we held it last Thursday. We had 4 listeners at any given time and only 1 person came through to speak. It worked beautifully. But we had that cost just to do that. If we have more listeners, that cost will go up. If the meeting goes longer, that cost will go up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And just to speak to a telephone town hall, previous job I had working for a U.S. Senator, we held telephone town halls with thousands of people around the state being able to interact, albeit it's a little more limited. You certainly had time limits and those types of things, but it does work. It's a little more work for staff, definitely, but it's something that is worth exploring, and it sounds like you have. So it is an option. We don't know. Our next council meeting is in 2 weeks, April 7th. We don't know where we're going to be in terms of where this pandemic that we're dealing with right now. I know I work for an organization that operates around the world, and I just want to say I am glad we live in the United States of America, because the infrastructure that we have is while there's a lot of concern about hospitalization and medical care, we are way far and above what so many other countries have. When you have a city in Africa of 15 million people and you have 3 respirators total in that city, you're looking at some serious fatalities. I think, was it Councilwoman Perot who wanted to speak?
Yes, thank you. I'm not familiar with the telephone town hall and how it works, and I apologize if I missed that explanation.
I think
Run me through how that works for us and for the public.
Yes, it works both ways, and I think what would be best is if Mr. Johnson could send out information to everybody via email about that system, because it is unique, and it with the way we're communicating tonight may not be the best time to explain it. So we'll just, I think, have him send out that information if that's all right with you. I think it is an option worth taking a look at, and I think Councilman Kavanagh, you may have had some experience with it, but it's worth, I think, exploring.
And Mr. Vice President.
Yes.
Mr. Vice President, I could add one more thing. We did look at the lesser options, the GoToMeeting, Zoom, some of the other alternative apps and programs that exist out there. In talking with Mr. Titi, the sound system here wasn't designed to use that. So it's less interactive. So that's why we went to the telephone town hall, because it allows an interactive meeting and a person to testify and the body to ask questions and have the interaction that we really think is important for that. So trying to call in is a very limited, as we can see tonight. That's certainly an option, but it's very limiting as well. But again, there's some staff and costs to the program, so that's just the reality of that. But I know the mayor would like to continue exploring that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Neri. Councilwoman Perot, will that work?
Yes, no, that's fine. I'll watch for that email. So just a couple of clarifying questions for Mr. Johnson, perhaps. So is there a possibility after the April 7th meeting that we might be able to postpone any further public hearings? Is that what I'm understanding, that P&Z has all of their scheduled for the rest of April, but perhaps we might be able to postpone a few?
Mr. Johnson, go ahead.
City Council.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Burrow, that is correct. We still have that timeline we're up against for anything coming out of planning and zoning that will have to be put in front of City Council, but they can basically not schedule anything after April 23rd if that's what they're directed to do, and then those would just sit until we get the clearance to start scheduling those again. I've been working with planning staff. Bill Parsons specifically sent sort of a timeline out of what we could schedule based on current applications that have already come in, and trying not to delay those. The direction of the mayor and council president Burnt last Friday was to limit planning and zoning when possible to no more than 3 hearings, and only 1 hearing if it is a larger project, for example, an annexation and zoning project. So Bill Parsons put together a great timeline that would limit those, but of course we don't know what tomorrow brings, of course, so we're kind of at the mercy of what this body wants to do and how applications come into planning.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And I think it's go ahead, Councilwoman Perot.
It's Liz.
Yes, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Councilman Strader.
Oh, if that's okay. I appreciate Councilman Kavanagh bringing this up. I have very deep reservations about the idea that anyone is endangering their health to attend a public hearing. And I'm also concerned about these kind of mitigating ideas that, maybe we'll limit the number of meetings, or we're doing certain things that we can, but I don't feel like the town hall alternative has been adequately publicized for people. People have reached out to me frustrated that they don't know how to access it. They don't understand what the alternatives are. I would hate to stop business, but I really think our priorities should be public safety first and foremost, and I would be supportive of a pause on all of these public meetings until we can get a system rolled out for people to access and widely publicize how to use it. I just think that is the right thing to do.
Thank you, Councilwoman Strader. I might have Mr. Neri jump in on this.
Sure. Members of the council, so again, some of the business things we would prefer to do because it does keep the city moving. We are doing exactly that, Councilwoman Strader, and trying to delay anything. We can't delay what's already been noticed. That's the issue. Anything else, we're trying very hard to push out. The things that are going to get heard, say, in April, are probably not going to get to you for 65 days, I mean, in all reality. So we are going to push them as far as we legally can. But again, we don't have abilities to simply cancel meetings with the way the code is currently. The other thing that we're doing, just to make you aware, the public records law still applies. It has a 3-day turnaround with a 10-day exception. We have to comply with that. So we are still having to do that type of work when we get requests for responses for that type of stuff. So we are handcuffed by the code, and we do have to meet those legal requirements in state code.
Thank you, Mr. Neri.
Mr. Hoagland, a follow-up.
Go ahead, Councilwoman Strader.
I guess, Mr. Neri, I would be curious to explore under our emergency declaration if we don't have the ability to cancel those meetings, given that it is an emergency.
We do not. We've already done that. We do not.
So that kind of,
Mr. Hoagland?
Councilman Cavanagh.
Kind of dovetailing on that, Mr. Neri, when you opened your comments, you mentioned without action by the governor. So what action would the governor need to take to give us the ability to do that?
So thank you. That's a great question, Councilmember Cavanagh. So if the governor, as he did last week with the public meeting access, if he were to suspend the public meeting law, which he can legally do under his emergency declaration, and if he's going to do that, could he suspend the 3-day turnaround for the public records? But that's just wishful thinking. But if the governor were to suspend the public meeting law requirements, then we could cancel the meetings.
Follow-up question?
Not yet, Mr. Hoagland.
Yes. Councilwoman Strader?
No, Perot.
Oh.
So,
Go ahead.
Other than the, sorry about that. Other than the individuals that perhaps the council members have chatted with in their own sphere of friends and family, have there been any other members of the public that have written in or expressed concerns about not being able to testify publicly? Have we received any letters? I haven't seen anything, but is there anything that's been any calls or any letters that we've received with expressed concern from members of the public?
So, Councilmember, sure, Mr. Vice President, members of the council, Councilmember Perot, based on individual applications, yes, we have had numerous people. But again, the way the Idaho Code reads, as long as they have access to participate, and now the governor has allowed us, and we haven't done this, other cities have, allowed us to prohibit access into the meeting room, which this city hasn't done to this point. They still have access. Physical presence isn't required as long as they can participate either in writing or some other telephonically, like we've been doing. We haven't done the town hall more than the one time, so that we haven't advertised that yet because we haven't done that yet. Besides the one, so if that's the direction we go, I would recommend we make it very public and very accessible. But right now, we are in compliance with the law the way it's currently crafted.
Thank you, Mr. Neri. Any other questions, discussion items on this subject?
Mr. Hoagland.
Mr. Vice President.
Councilman Burt.
I echo the same concern that every other council member has and the mayor has and staff and all that who are involved at City Hall. It's obvious and very important that people understand that our main concern is how we can keep the public involved in the conversation while having those who are involved, whether it be the public, whether it be the applicants or those representing the applicant, city staff, and elected officials safe. Ultimately, that's the most important thing. Up until now, we followed the recommendations from the governor, the CDH, the CDC, and obviously it would be my recommendation to continue to do this. having conversation about upgrading equipment or taking advantage of other ways in which we can communicate better. Honestly, the end of this discussion, probably within the last 45 minutes to an hour, has been fantastic on the phone. I don't know what the difference is, but this dialogue has been great. I guess, we've done things like postpone non-essential items on the agenda. We push back things to future meeting dates. I'm open to the discussion of where we go from here in keeping the public safe, but also following the direction from our governor, because ultimately I think that it's until he changes the law, the public meeting law, unless we can find a creative or unique way in which to, keep on going. I mean, it's almost that we have to follow, and I believe that we should follow the law that's in front of us.
Thank you, Councilman Burnt. And as council president, I think it's appropriate that as we have ideas or things that we think the city should be following, we'll get those. I know we should get those to you as you have discussions regularly with the mayor and can represent the council on those concerns, and we'll certainly do that.
Mr. Hoagland.
Councilman Cavanagh.
I think to that, maybe some suggestions is, again, maybe a request for either the mayor or the council or both. Maybe send a letter to the governor requesting that he suspend the public meeting law requirements. I think that we could probably collaborate with a lot of our jurisdictions to the east and the west, perhaps AIC, so that we can be better accountable to our citizens. My suggestion is, I think we've got to build a better mousetrap for city council meetings for the month of April. And if life gets better and we don't have to use it, that's fine. But Councilmember Hoagland was saying before the meeting, we got 2 weeks to try and figure this out. Tonight was okay, challenging at times. We can try and fix that. But the biggest piece that we've got to figure out is how we're going to communicate this to the public. So if it's telephone town halls for the month, yes, that comes at a cost, but I think that's a cost that we're capable of bearing. And if that's the plan, we want to start communicating that out to the public immediately. This is something that we're going to go and do. Again, a suggestion on my part, if applicants are open to continuing things out, that, in the past, we've got a practice of requiring developers to pay for renoticing. Again, maybe that's something the city's willing to bear the cost of in light of this. So it's not very costly, but those are things that I think that we need to be talking about doing. And I assume that staff are doing this, engaging with our applicants, the development community, who say time and time again they want to be good neighbors. This is the time to step up and be good neighbors. And let's slow this process down. Let this pandemic move past us, and then we can get back to work.
Thank you, Councilman Cavanagh, for those recommendations. Any others?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I am also supportive of writing a letter to the governor. I think we need flexibility right now. We don't know how bad this could get. Maybe it will improve, but I think we need the flexibility to not have certain meetings. And I think in the meantime, I think the number one thing we could do is to really commit to pushing everything back that we can for a couple of weeks while we widely publicize and figure out what our plan is for the public to access hearings without appearing in person. Councilwoman Perot had asked previously if we've received feedback from the public. It's not part of any kind of official application, but I have received a lot of feedback on Nextdoor threads from members of the public that felt that they are not aware of teleconferencing options and so forth. And I just don't think that it's a responsible thing to have meetings where people have to make a choice between appearing in public or they're just not aware of the alternatives. So I'm supportive of sending a letter to the governor. I'm also supportive of doing everything we can to push things back while we get a good plan together for April. I agree with that strategy.
Thank you, Councilwoman Strader. Any other comments?
Mr. Vice President,
Council President Burnt, go ahead.
so grateful for the discussion up until now. So grateful for you guys and for the concern that this body has. I've heard every concern and recommendation that you've made and we've talked about. I will reach out to the mayor after this meeting is concluded to have conversation with him. I hope he's okay. I hope things are okay. I know that he had to leave the meeting a little early. But I'd like to get his input as well and keep you guys informed and keep you guys in the loop. These are trying times. These are interesting times. And like we've said in the past and in this evening as well, it's just important that we keep people safe. And so let me talk to the mayor and we'll see where this goes.
Thank you, Councilman Burnt. Appreciate those good words, and we know that you'll represent us well with the mayor and get things moving forward.
Mr. Vice President, can I make one more comment?
Yes, Mr. Neri.
So, council members, one small innovation that Mr. Johnson and the mayor's office came up with that you noticed to maybe end on a positive note is we did try to estimate times of the hearings tonight in an attempt to at least inform the public so they don't have to be here earlier than what they needed to be. And then we thought that would at least be a start in getting folks to come at an appropriate time, not have to come 2 hours early and sit. So, and we hit those marks by a mile. So it worked out just great.
Mr. Neri.
Thank you, Mr. Neri.
Mr. Hoagland.
Councilman Kavanagh.
Again, I don't know whose idea that was, but I thought that is just a very thoughtful way to communicate to the public that we are doing all the things that we can do to benefit them and that we are trying to look through this through their eyes. It's good work.
Thank you. No further discussion and no action on this, even though we reserve that possibility. We're going to move on to item 8, future meeting topics. Any comments for that, future meeting topics? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Vice President.
Councilman Kavanagh.
I move we adjourn the meeting.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you all for calling in.
Aye.
All right. Thank you, and this meeting is adjourned.
Hey, thanks, guys, back at City Hall for your help. Staff did an amazing job tonight. Just wanted to say thank you. Very well done.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
Greg.